Chapter 565. Ruan Hongling, who was not far away, saw that Li Yundong had refused Chris and the others offered to be his apprentices. She gloated, but soon she found that Zhou Qin was looking at Chris sympathetically. Ruan Hongling's heart suddenly skipped a beat. She found that Ziyuan was not by her side at this time, so she walked up to Zhou Qin and said in a low voice, "Zhou Qin, are you so relieved to let Li Yundong go to Mount Huangshan alone?" Zhou Qin didn't doubt her. She sighed and said, "I want to go too, but Master won't let me. What can I do?" Ruan Hongling winked at Zhou Qin, then glanced at Chris, who was not far away, and blinked. "Go to Mount Huangshan." Zhou Qin was also an extremely smart woman. She immediately understood and said, "You mean?" Ruan Hongling immediately made a shushing gesture and then blinked her eyes. Zhou Qin's eyes lit up, and she cast a grateful look at Ruan Hongling. She immediately took 2 steps forward, but halfway through she hesitated again. She turned back and whispered to Ruan Hongling, "No, if Master finds out, he will definitely blame me." Ruan Hongling laughed and secretly pointed at Su Chan. "If you take her with you, will Li Yundong blame you?" Zhou Qin was stunned for a moment, and then she was overjoyed. She smiled and nodded to Ruan Hongling, then walked up to Su Chan and said softly, "Su Chan, do you want to go to Mount Huangshan?" Su Chan was looking in the direction of Li Yundong's departure, frowning and at a loss for what to do. She had waited so long for Li Yundong to come back, but who would have thought that he would leave in less than 10 minutes? This really made her so worried that her heart was broken. When the girl heard Zhou Qin's words, her eyes suddenly lit up. "I want to go. Sister Zhou Qin, do you want to go too?" But the girl's face soon fell again and she said, "But Yundong knows that I'm not obedient. He will scold me." Zhou Qin pointed at Chris and the others and said in a low voice, "Let's say that these foreigners insisted on going to Master, and then we tried everything to persuade them, but it was useless. We were afraid that something would happen to them, so we had to accompany them to find Master. What do you think?" Su Chan was overjoyed and quickly nodded, but she immediately frowned and asked, "But how did they know where Master went?" Zhou Qin hesitated for a moment, but she quickly pointed to Ruan Hongling next to her and said, "Let's just say that she let it slip." Su Chan was shocked. I don't think that's a good idea." Ruan Hongling, who was at the side, also heard it. She was shocked. "Why did I let it slip?" Zhou Qin turned her head, looked at Ruan Hongling with a faint smile and said, "It was your idea. What's wrong with you suffering a loss?" Ruan Hongling saw that there was a hidden meaning in Zhou Qin's words. She smiled guiltily, but soon she braced herself and said, "Well, it's a slip of the tongue. However, you must not tell anyone about my idea. Otherwise I will not admit that I spilled the beans." Zhou Qin was overjoyed. "It's a deal." However, Su Chan asked suspiciously, "What are you talking about?" Zhou Qin had always been decisive. She said to Su Chan, "Su Chan, don't worry about it now. Master's yang spirit is flying very fast. We won't be able to catch up with him in a while. Are you going or not? Just say it." Su Chan hesitated for a long time. She really missed Li Jiandong very much, and she was worried about the safety of her sweetheart. She gritted her teeth and said, "Okay, let's go." Zhou Qin was overjoyed. She quickly walked over to Chris and said in English, "Chris, Master is actually testing you. If you want to be apprenticed in China, you have to go through many tests. If you really want to be apprenticed, you should follow my master. Wherever he goes, you will go." Chris's face lit up with joy and she quickly asked, "Then where did he go?" Zhou Qin suddenly smiled, feeling proud of the success of her plan. She smiled and said, "He went to Mount Huangshan, but if you want to go, I'm afraid you won't be able to find him. Su Chan and I will take you there." John and Chris were both overjoyed. Only Alba muttered a few words in a low voice, but no one heard what she said. Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, saw that Zhou Qin, Su Chan and Chris had finished their discussion, and quickly chased after Li Jiandong. Seeing that everyone was far away and that they had been gone for a long time, she laughed proudly and said, "Even if you are a living fox spirit and a clever young lady, you still have to fall into my trap. Aha, you have fallen into my trap." At this time Ziyuan, who was in the room, heard her laughter. She came out curiously and asked, "What are you laughing at outside?" Ruan Hongling proudly told her about her plan and then said, "Shiji Ziyuan, I see that you and Li Jiandong are always flirting with each other. It's obvious that you like each other very much, but you just refuse to say it. If I hadn't helped you like this, when would you have been able to break through this layer of window paper?" However, Ziyuan's reaction was unexpected. She said in shock and anger, "Are you helping me?" Ruan Hongling asked curiously, "Isn't it?" How dare you say that you don't like Li Jiandong? Humph, Li Jiandong is so loyal to Su Chan. Last time she caused such a big trouble, Li Jiandong didn't blame her. Humph, this time with Su Chan's character she will definitely cause trouble again. When that time comes, I will see that she causes trouble again and again. One day Li Jiandong will be annoyed by her. At that time Shiji Ziyuan Yuk. Before she could finish speaking, Ziyuan suddenly flew into a rage. ****. She couldn't help but raise her hand to slap Ruan Hongling, but when her hand was about to hit Ruan Hongling's face, she stopped abruptly. Ziyuan quickly glanced at the room and quickly closed the door. She suppressed her anger and scolded, "Are you helping me? How could you do such a thing? Haven't you heard that it's better to tear down 10 temples than to ruin a marriage? You disappoint me so much." After that, Ziyuan stomped her feet and rushed out. Ruan Hongling was frightened by Ziyuan's rare anger. She subconsciously covered her face. After Ziyuan left, she subconsciously asked, "Shiji, where are you going?" Ziyuan turned her head and said angrily, "Do you know how many people are watching us now? I'm going to get them back." As she spoke, she raised her hand and pointed at Ruan Hongling with hatred. She glared at her and said, "If anything happens to them, I won't spare you." Ruan Hongling watched Ziyuan leave in a daze. She felt both wronged and sad in her heart. She couldn't help crying for a moment. She cried, "If it weren't for you, would I have to be the bad guy? It's clear that I like him so much that I even dream of his name at night, but I just refuse to say it. I'm the bad guy. It's fine if you don't think about me, but you still scold me like this." The more Ruan Hongling thought about it, the more she couldn't get over it. She turned her head and rushed to her room opposite the door, crying loudly. In Ziyuan's opinion, Su Chan and Zhou Qin wouldn't be able to go far with 3 foreigners who had no cultivation skills at all. Therefore, after she rushed out of the area, she immediately picked a place where there was no one and quickly flew to the top of a tall building. She looked around from a high vantage point. Ziyuan looked for a while and saw the figures of Su Chan, Zhou Qin, Chris, and the others suddenly flash past at the corner of the street. She immediately shouted, "Su Chan, Zhou Qin?" After that, she immediately chased after them. Su Chan's ears were sharp and she immediately heard Ziyuan's shout. Her heart tightened and she quickly said to Zhou Qin, "Oh no, Sister Ziyuan must have found out and come to take us back." Zhou Qin also frowned and said, "Ziyuan is too steady. She definitely won't agree to let us go. What should we do?" When Su Chan saw Zhou Qin looking at her, she rolled her eyes and immediately looked at Chris and Hardadef. Chris was quite shrewd. Although she didn't know what was going on, she subconsciously didn't answer. Alba didn't understand what they were talking about, so she kept her mouth shut. Only Hardadef said casually, "Of course we should avoid her. Otherwise how can we find Master?" Zhou Qin and Su Chan were delighted at the same time and said with a smile, "That's what you said." The two of them took Chris, Hardadef and Alba to a corner. Su Chan quickly put up a Nyan seal to hide their figures. As soon as Ziyuan arrived at the place where they had appeared, she saw that there was no trace of them. She was shocked and hurriedly looked around. However, she was originally a beautiful woman who was as beautiful as a fairy. As soon as she appeared on the street, she immediately attracted the attention of passers-by. Some drivers even saw Ziyuan at a glance and were immediately shocked by her amazing beauty. For a time, there were many car accidents on the road and there were constant rear-end collisions. When Ziyuan saw such a thing happening on the street, she couldn't help but feel a headache and become more and more anxious. Last time, Xinyan Tantrism had secretly sent a letter of challenge under her nose, which had already made her feel a little ashamed. Now Li Jiandong had entrusted these people to her. If anything happened to Zhou Qin and Su Chan, how could she face Li Jiandong? Ziyuan also didn't want to shout in the street. She quickly calculated in her heart and thought to herself, could it be that they are hiding from me? Ziyuan deliberately stomped her feet in the street and left quickly. She hid in a corner and secretly looked around. Seeing that Ziyuan had left, Chris said, "She's gone. Can we go out?" However, Su Chan raised a finger and made a silent gesture. "Shu, Sister Ziyuan is very smart. She won't be so stupid. She must be waiting for us somewhere. Don't worry. Anyway, we know that Yundong has gone to Mount Huangshan. When the time comes, we can go to Pine Valley Cottage and find him eventually." Hearing her words, Chris closed her mouth and did not speak. They waited for a long time until Alba kept complaining and Hardadef became very impatient. At this time, Ziyuan flashed out of the corner in disappointment. While the people on the street were not paying attention, she instantly turned into a green light and flew into the air, flying in the direction of Mount Huangshan. At this time, Su Chan breathed a sigh of relief and said proudly, "Well, we can go now. Follow Sister Ziyuan." However, Zhou Qin sighed and said, "We've been delayed for so long. I don't know if we can catch up. Forget it, let's go. Now that the car is moving fast, it is estimated that we will be able to reach Mount Huangshan in Anhui in a few hours." After the discussion, they stopped the car together and went to Mount Huangshan with Li Jiandong, Ziyuan, and the others one after the other. But what they didn't know was that because of Ruan Hongling's spur-of-the-moment instigation, the famous Earth-3 immortals in the cultivation world, known as Fairy Immortal, Human Immortal and Fox Immortals had been created. Similarly, Chris, Hardedef and Alba, the three foreigners who wanted to be apprentices with different purposes, would completely change their fates and go their separate ways from then on. Chapter 566. Not long after Li Yundong flew in the air, he found that Lin Xueqing was waiting for him in the air. Her face was full of pride, as if she knew that Li Yundong would definitely follow her. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. Seeing Li Yundong flying closer, Lin Xueqing was about to speak proudly, but she saw that Li Yundong kept flying past her, which made her swallow her words. She had no choice but to follow Li Yundong to Mount Huangshan angrily. After flying for a long time, they finally arrived near Mount Huangshan. When Li Yundong landed, he saw that he was in a magnificent mountain range. There were thousands of peaks and valleys, strange pines everywhere, strange rocks piercing the sky and dense clouds. Li Yundong looked around and felt that as far as his eyes could see, there were pine trees everywhere. These pine trees used stone as soil and took root in the cracks of the giant rocks. From a distance, he could see that the pine trees were green and dense all over the mountains. Their trunks and branches were twisted, and they were in a variety of shapes. Some were tall and straight against the shore, some were standing on the peak, some were hanging upside down on the precipice, some were flat like a lid and some were sharp like a sword. Some followed the cliffs and ravines and went around the rocks. Some went through the cracks of the caves and broke out of the rocks. Suddenly hanging, suddenly horizontal, suddenly lying down, suddenly rising. It was truly a scene where there was no tree, no pine, no stone, no pine, no pine. Li Yundong felt as if he was in a paradise, a fairyland on earth. The air around him was filled with the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, which was extremely rich and refreshing. Sure enough, when one returns from Mount Huangshan, one doesn't look at the mountain. Li Yundong couldn't help but look at the beautiful scenery around him and sigh from the bottom of his heart. At this time, Lin Xueqing also landed beside him and said proudly, "Of course. Why don't you look at where you are? This is Tiandu Peak, the highest peak of Mount Huangshan. Haven't you heard of the saying, no matter how many people come from Mount Huangshan, they will be surprised when they see Tiandu?" Li Yunyang smiled slightly, as if he had forgotten about the Diuanjin for a moment. He looked around with great emotion and thought to himself, if I can live here with Chana in the future, cultivate the Tao together and travel together, it will be a matter of envy for immortals and lovebirds. While Li Yunyang was sighing, he saw Lin Xueqing running quickly toward Tiandu Peak. She was like a spirit monkey jumping and running quickly in the woods. In the blink of an eye, she had run halfway up the mountain. Li Yundong quickly shouted, "Hey, where are you going?" Li Yundong's shout spread throughout the valley, causing echoes to echo. Lin Xueqing stopped, turned around and shouted, "Go and find Master Wan." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Isn't it at Pine Valley Cottage?" Lin Xueqing laughed and said, "Who said we're in Pine Valley Cottage?" "On Celestial Capital Peak. Come with me." Li Yundong was full of doubts, but he quickly followed. Li Yundong jumped up and quickly climbed up the hillside. When he reached the top of Celestial Capital Peak, he looked around and saw a vast sea of clouds around him. The clouds and mountains were connected, and the rivers were in a line. Looking down at the mountains, he saw thousands of peaks competing for beauty. Only the mountain under his feet pierced through the sky, looking down at the peaks, magnificent and magnificent. When Li Yundong looked down, he saw that the cableway on the mountain was winding like a long gray snake around the mountain, coiling and circling. When the mountain wind blew, the cableway would shake and make a thrilling sound. It was extremely thrilling. Lin Xueqing saw that Li Yundong's eyes were full of admiration and appreciation. She was proud of herself, but suddenly an idea came to her mind and she said, "By the way, I'll give you a test. Make a couplet with this scene in front of you. You should have the words sea, sky, mountain and peak. What do you think?" Although Li Yundong didn't know why Lin Xueqing suddenly wanted to test him, when he looked at the magnificent scenery around him, he felt a heroic feeling in his chest, as if he wanted to compete with God. He felt that although the world was big, people could defeat it. This was the biggest difference between Taoists and Buddhists. Buddhists paid attention to knowing their destiny and being obedient, and people could not win against heaven, while Taoists paid attention to going against heaven, and people could win against heaven. A burst of fierce yuanyang qi seemed to be surging in Li Yundong's chest, like a torrent spewing out. He immediately blurted out, "When the sea is boundless, the sky is the shore. When the mountain reaches the top, I am the peak." When Li Yundong recited this couplet, his voice was loud and his breath was long. It was as if countless bells were ringing in the mountains at the same time, and it was also like continuous waves, magnificent and layered. It was transmitted far away, echoing in the valley and the sea of clouds. Anyone who heard it would feel their blood boiling and their hearts opening up. Although Lin Xueqing was a woman, she knew that Li Yundong had borrowed Lin Zex's couplet to answer the question. But when she heard this sentence, she couldn't help but be shocked by Li Yundong's passion. For a moment, she marveled in her heart, "This person is so broad-minded and courageous. No wonder people have given him the nickname Invincible Li after only half a year of cultivation. It seems that I really underestimated him before." Just based on his spirit when he said these words, it is enough to conclude that this person will definitely be a great grandmaster and a great Jinren in the future. She looked at Li Yundong and was secretly shocked, but she suddenly heard a laugh not far away. "What a good when the mountain reaches the top, I am the peak." Li Yundong and Lin Xueqing turned their heads and saw Wan Jinyuan, who was wearing a Taoist robe and holding a horsetail whisk, walking toward them with a laugh. As soon as Li Yundong saw Wan Jinyuan, he turned around, bowed to him and said with a smile, "Master Wan." Lin Xueqing bowed to Wan Jinyuan and said casually, "Uncle Wan, I've brought him to you. Is there anything else I can do for you?" Wan Jinyuan stroked his beard and said to Lin Xueqing with a smile, "Qing, it's all right. Go and find your master. I want to have a word with Jinren Li." Lin Xueqing responded and quickly left. But after a few steps, she looked back at Li Yundong with a strange look in her eyes. She quickly glanced at Wan Jinyuan again, as if she wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Wan Jinyuan smiled and said, "Qing, is there anything else?" Lin Xueqing hesitated for a moment, then shook her head and said, "Nothing. I'm leaving, uncle." Then she left. After seeing her go far away, Li Yundong smiled and said to Wan Jinyuan, "Master Wan, how have you been?" Wan Jinyuan laughed and said, "You're welcome, Jinren Li. Recently, I've been busy preparing to refine the Diyuan Jindan, so I can't get away from it. I had to ask Qing to invite you here for a chat. Qing Tsong has been spoiled by her master. If she has been disrespectful in any way, I would like to apologize to you first." Li Yundong waved his hand and said, "It's nothing. But I'm very curious about why you're here, Jinren. Why aren't you on Mount Gizao?" Wan Jinyuan laughed and said, "Mount Gizao? I've been robbed twice on Mount Gizao. Wouldn't I be looking for trouble if I were to refine elixirs there?" Li Yundong asked curiously, "Oh? Is there no problem with Mount Huangshan?" Wan Jinyuan smiled and said, "Mount Huangshan has been the holy land of our Taoism since ancient times. In modern times, our Gizao sect has been operating here for a long time. Our power is deeply rooted and it's difficult for outsiders to enter. Moreover, Chindu Peak is now in a state of closure, so tourists can't enter. Therefore, there's no need to worry about being disturbed when I refine elixirs here. No one will know that I'm refining the Diyuan Jindan here." Li Yundong looked around with a smile and nodded slightly. "Master Wan, you're really thoughtful. I admire you." Wan Jinyuan laughed and said, "Jinren Li is really capable. I didn't expect that you would bring back the 1,000-year-old snow lotus so quickly. Now, there's great hope for the refining of the Diyuan Jindan." Li Yundong wanted to ask Wan Jinyuan why he was monitoring him, but after thinking for a moment, he refrained from asking. Instead, he asked, "Master Wan, how can I be sure that the Diyuan Jindan will be refined when the time comes?" Seeing that Li Yundong was sensible enough not to mention that he had been monitoring him, Wan Jinyuan breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. He couldn't help but admire Li Yundong's maturity. He smiled and said, "Jinren Li, you don't have to worry. You can watch and accompany me all the way until the elixirs are refined. I believe that with your ability, you won't be worried that I will swallow the Diyuan Jindan in front of you, will you?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Master Wan, you must be joking." As he spoke, he generously handed over the 1,000-year-old snow lotus wrapped in a white handkerchief and kept the white handkerchief for himself. Wan Jinyuan's eyes lit up when he saw the 1,000-year-old snow lotus. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out and held it up. Then he said in a trembling voice, "Is this the 1,000-year-old snow lotus? Is this the 1,000-year-old snow lotus? Oh my God. Wang Jinyuan knelt down in the direction of Tianshan Mountain in the west with tears in his eyes and said in a choked voice, "Master, I finally didn't let you down. I finally have the opportunity to refine the Diyuan Jindan in my lifetime." Li Yundong saw that Wang Jinyuan, a middle-aged man in his 40s or 50s, was so excited that he lost his composure at this time. Thinking of some of Wang Jinyuan's life stories that Ziyuan had told him before, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He said, "Master Wan, if your master knows, he will definitely bless you." Wang Jinyuan held up the 1,000-year-old snow lotus with both hands and kowtowed 3 times respectfully. Then he got up and wiped his tears with his sleeves. Only then did he laugh and say, "Jinrenli, I'm sorry. I learned the Tao from my master when I was 10 years old. Although my master's cultivation has reached the sage realm, he has always regretted that he could not see the magic of the Diyuan Jindan with his own eyes in his lifetime. He could not refine the long-lost Diyuan Jindan with his own hands. Now, I have finally realized my master's last wish. Thank you very much for your help, Jinrenli." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "I'd like to watch Master Wan refine the elixir." Wang Jinyuan laughed and carefully hid the 1,000-year-old snow lotus. He pointed to a hidden cave not far away and said with a smile, "Look, this is the door of the Immortals' Cave. I've already arranged everything inside. Please come with me." While Li Yundong and Wang Jinyuan were heading for the alchemy cave, Lin Xueqing had already returned to the Pine Valley Cottage, which was located in the north of Mount Huangshan. However, she hadn't expected that there would be 2 unexpected guests in the Pine Valley Cottage at this time. One of them was an old man with a ruddy complexion and a kind smile on his face. He was enthusiastically chatting with his master, Zhong Qingsong. Next to him stood a tall, sexy, and fashionable woman. These 2 people were none other than Zheng Yuan and his disciple, Ding Nan. "I came home very late. I still owe everyone an update. I'll make it up tomorrow morning." Chapter 567. When Zhong Qingsong saw Lin Xueqing, he immediately stood up with a smile and said to her enthusiastically, "Qinger, come here quickly. I'll introduce you to a famous cultivator. Watch net. This is the head of the Yinyang sect in Mount Wuhua, Zheng Yuan. This is his beloved disciple, LV Fengping." Lin Xueqing and her master rarely traveled in the world. Except for the last time they had participated in the tea art competition, she had almost no contact with outsiders. Therefore, she had developed a solitary, arrogant, and conceited temperament. But even though she rarely went out, she still knew something about Zheng Yuan. She glanced at him and suddenly asked, "Are you Zheng Yuan?" When Zhong Qingsong heard Lin Xueqing's rude words, his face changed and he scolded, "****, how can you say that?" Zheng Yuan stroked his white beard with a smile and said, "It doesn't matter, young people." As he spoke, he took out a jade thumb ring from his bosom and handed it over with a smile. "I came in a hurry so I didn't bring any decent gifts. Your master and I are best friends, so this is just a small gift. Haha, wear it and play with it." At a glance, Lin Xueqing saw that the jade ring was emerald green and had no flaws. It was obviously a rare treasure. She felt strange in her heart, but she didn't take the jade ring. Instead, she asked, "Jinren Zheng, I heard that your reputation doesn't seem to be very good." Zheng Yuan and Zhong Qingsong's expressions changed at the same time. Zhong Qingsong shouted angrily, "Qingya, how dare you? Jinren Zheng is my savior. How can you speak to him like that?" Zheng Yuan's expression changed at first, and a trace of resentment flashed in his eyes. But it disappeared in a flash, and soon his face was full of a kind and magnanimous smile. He stroked his beard and said with a smile, "It doesn't matter. It's normal for some people in this world to misunderstand me." Ding Nan, who was standing to the side, also seized the opportunity and said with a charming smile, "Most rumors are untrustworthy. It's human nature to be jealous of those with talent." Zhong Qingsong quickly said, Yes, Jinren Zheng's ability is so great that it will naturally arouse the jealousy of others." Seeing this, Lin Xueqing couldn't help but think of some rumors about Li Yundong. She agreed with them in her heart, so she didn't say anything more. However, she didn't take the jade ring either. Instead, she asked, "Forget it, let's not talk about this. Jianghu rumors are indeed not credible. However, I can't accept this jade thumb ring. As the saying goes, there's no such thing as an undeserved reward. I'm going to take your things. If you have any requests later, it's fine if Master and I can do it, but if we can't, then it's hard to say. As the saying goes, one's mouth softens when fed, but one's hands are short when taken, isn't that right?" Lin Xueqing was so sharp-tongued that Zheng Yuan's face turned blue and red. Zhong Qingsong was so angry that he pulled her to him and scolded her in a low voice. "Qing'er, what's wrong with you today? Did he take the wrong medicine? Is this how I taught you to treat people?" Zheng Yuan suppressed his anger and waved his hand with a smile. "Brother Zhong, you don't have to teach her a lesson. Your disciple is a straightforward person. Good, I like this kind of person. However, your disciple is right. I didn't come here for nothing this time. I have something to ask of you." Zhong Qingsong glared at Lin Xueqing, as if he was going to settle accounts with her later. He turned his head and said to Zheng Yuan with a smile, "Jinren Zheng, if there's anything you need, just tell me. I will definitely do it if I can." Zheng Yuan smiled and said, "I've always heard that you are a good alchemist, and your alchemy skills are only inferior to Wan Jinyuan, the master of the Gizao sect. You also have a large number of production channels for medicinal materials. My beloved disciple has just finished the Zhuji phase recently and has eaten up all the panaceas she had stored before. So this time I want to ask you to replenish them." When Zhong Qingsong heard this, he suddenly looked embarrassed. He hesitated for a moment, and Zheng Yuan immediately said, "What's wrong, brother Zhong? Is there anything you can't do? If there is, just tell me. I will definitely not embarrass you." Zhong Qingsong quickly said with a smile, "To tell you the truth, Jinren Zheng. Recently, all the medicinal materials on hand have been sold out. I don't have any in stock, so I haven't been able to refine any pills. However, I still have a bottle of Xinxiao powder. I don't know if Jinren Zheng will like it." Zheng Yuan's face was full of astonishment. "You've sold all of them? Brother Zhong, are you kidding me? As far as I know, all the medicinal materials near Mount Huangshan are in your hands. How can you not have any in stock? Which pharmaceutical factory has such a big appetite to swallow all of your stock in one gulp?" Zhong Qingsong shook his head and said, "Jinren Zheng, I really don't have any left. As for who bought it, I can't say. But please believe me, if there is, I will definitely give it to you with both hands." Zheng Yuan was greatly disappointed and shocked. Zhong Qingsong's heart was full of guilt. He tentatively said, "Jinren Zheng, why don't you take my Xinxiao powder for now? After a while, I'll definitely bring the refined pills to visit Mount Wuhua. Is that okay?" Zheng Yuan thought to himself, "Humph, what's the use of a body-strengthening pill like Xinxiao powder? Zhong Qingsong must be hiding something from me." Seeing that Zhong Qingsong was unwilling to let go, Zheng Yuan decided to be a good person to the end. He waved his hand, smiled generously and said, "Forget it. You can keep it. I'll come back another day." Zhong Qingsong said to him with a guilty face, "I'm really sorry to have made you come here in vain, Jinren Zheng." Zheng Yuan chuckled. Just as he was about to speak, he heard a clear female voice coming from outside the Pine Valley cottage. "Abbess Zhong, is sect master here?" The four people in the room were suddenly stunned. They looked outside and saw a beautiful woman in a white dress standing outside. She was slim and graceful like a fairy. It was Zi Yuan. Why is she here? The same thought flashed through the minds of the four people at the same time. Lin Xueqing had some conflicts with Zi Yuan before. When she suddenly saw Zi Yuan, she frowned, walked up and said loudly, "What are you doing here?" In the face of Lin Xueqing's rude questioning, Zi Yuan quickly glanced around, as if she was looking for the backs of Su Chan and the others. She said politely and reservedly, "Jinren Lin, I want to ask you something." Lin Xueqing frowned and asked, "What is it?" Zi Yuan said, "Did Li Yundong come to Mount Huangshan with you?" Lin Xueqing opened her mouth and blurted out, "Yes, what's wrong?" Zhong Qingsong, who was standing to one side, suddenly frowned and secretly glared at Lin Xueqing, but Lin Xueqing acted as if she hadn't seen it. Zi Yuan asked again, "Then where is Li Yundong now? Is he with Sect Master Wan? Did anyone else come to see him?" Lin Xueqing said straightforwardly, "No, they." Zhong Qingsong immediately interrupted, "They're not here. Sect Master lives deep in Mount Gizao. How could he be in Mount Huangshan? I think you must be mistaken, Zi Yuan." Lin Xueqing was stunned, but soon understood that her master didn't want to reveal Wan Jinyuan's whereabouts. She quickly changed her words and said, "Yes, they're not here." Zi Yuan saw that the master and disciple were vague and evasive. It was obvious that they were hiding something. She became suspicious and glanced at Zheng Yuan and Ding Nan again. She saw that although Zheng Yuan was looking at her with a smile on his face, his eyes were full of vigilance. He couldn't help touching his cuffs as if he was eager to take action as long as she was in trouble. Zi Yuan's heart trembled. She quickly changed the topic and asked Ding Nan, "Ding Nan, I haven't seen you for a while. I didn't expect you to have reached the Zhuji phase. Congratulations." Ding Nan looked at her strangely and said coldly, "Thank you." Ziyuan asked again, have you seen Li Yundong? When Ding Nan heard the name Li Yundong, her heart trembled slightly. She shook her head and said, no. Seeing that Ding Nan didn't seem to be lying, Ziyuan suddenly had many questions in her heart, but she asked again, have you seen Su Chan and Zhou Qin? As soon as Ding Nan heard the name Zhou Qin, she sneered and gritted her teeth. Zhou Qin? No, if you see her you must tell me where she is. I want to have a good time with her. Ziyuan frowned slightly and thought to herself, strange, where did they go? Lin Xueqing clearly asked Li Yundong to go to Pine Valley Cottage to find Wan Jinyuan. Seeing that Ziyuan was silent, Zhong Qingsong said, Zhenren Ziyuan, if there's nothing else, please forgive me for not entertaining you. Seeing that he had asked her to leave, Ziyuan had no choice but to say helplessly, Abbess Zhong, if you see Li Yundong or Su Chan, you must tell me where they are. Zhong Qingsong smiled slightly and said, okay. Ziyuan bowed slightly to him, looked around unwillingly and soon turned into a beam of blue light and flew away. Zheng Yuan, who was standing to one side, saw that Zhong Qingsong and Lin Xueqing both breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Ziyuan leave. He suddenly became suspicious, but he had always been shrewd, so his face remained calm. He smiled and said goodbye to Zhong Qingsong, then took Ding Nan all the way down the mountain. When the two of them went down the mountain, Ding Nan said to Zheng Yuan unwillingly, Master, did we come all the way in vain? Did we return empty-handed? Zheng Yuan lowered his head and pondered all the way as if he was thinking about something. He raised his hand and motioned for Ding Nan not to speak. Zheng Yuan stood on the mountain road and lowered his head to ponder for a while. Suddenly he raised his head and looked up at the sky. Although the sky was clear, it was densely covered with clouds, especially in the direction of Tiandu Peak. The clouds were dense with colorful clouds like dragons and tigers, and the top of Tiandu Peak was even more colorful. Zheng Yuan's heart skipped a beat as if he had thought of something. His eyes suddenly lit up, he slapped his thigh and said loudly, I know. Ding Nan was shocked by Zheng Yuan's shout and quickly asked, Master, what do you know? Zheng Yuan laughed out loud, pointed in the direction of Tiandu Peak and said proudly, Brother Zhong, I treated you with sincerity, but you fooled me like this. Do you think I can't guess it if you hide it from me? Ding Nan was intrigued by Zheng Yuan's words and asked, Master, what's the matter? Zheng Yuan laughed and pointed to the top of Tiandu Peak, saying, My good disciple, look. Since ancient times, if an alchemist wanted to refine elixirs of immortality, he must find a peak with magnificent feng shui. Moreover, wherever he refined elixirs, there would definitely be abnormalities. Back then, Zhang Daoling, the founder of the Jingyi school, was refining elixirs on Mount Longhu. At that time, the sky was densely covered with colorful clouds, and the clouds were like dragons and tigers fighting. Look, isn't this scene very similar to when Zhang Tianshi was refining elixirs? Ding Nan glanced over and couldn't help nodding. However, she had been cultivating for some time and had completed the Zhuji phase. She was no longer an ignorant person who knew nothing about cultivation like before. She said curiously, but when cultivators refine elixirs and build the Zhuji phase, there will also be such abnormalities. Zheng Yuan clapped his hands and said, You're right. But think about what Zhong Qingsong, Lin Xueqing, and Ziyuan said before. People like Zhong Qingsong usually hoard a large number of medicinal materials in their hands so that they can refine elixirs themselves. But why were they suddenly swept away? Humph, someone must be refining a peerless elixir of immortality, so they need to consume a huge amount of medicinal materials. This is why all the medicinal materials in his hands have been taken away. Zheng Yuan's eyes flickered and he said, Moreover, Lin Xueqing and Zhong Qingsong were evasive in their words before. It's obvious that they're hiding something. They obviously met Li Yunyang and Wan Jinyuan, but they said they didn't. This means that they're hiding their whereabouts. But why did they have to hide the whereabouts of these two people? What is it that cannot be told to others? Zheng Yuan's face showed a cunning and confident smile. He pointed to Tiandu Peak and said with certainty, These two people must be refining the peerless elixir of immortality there. If my guess is right, it must be the Diyuan Jindan. Ding Nan was shocked. The Diyuan Jindan? Zheng Yuan laughed and said, Yes, it's very likely that it's this elixir of immortality. There was a strong sense of greed in Ding Nan's eyes. She knew that after Zhou Qin had eaten the Renyuan Jindan, she had become so strong that she didn't even dare to look at her directly. If she could eat the Diyuan Jindan, what would happen? Ding Nan instigated, Master, should we? Zheng Yuan didn't wait for her to finish speaking. He snorted and laughed. Yes, of course we have to rob it. How can we let such a peerless elixir of immortality slip away from under our noses? Ding Nan was overjoyed, but she soon frowned and said, "But, with just the two of us." Zheng Yuan sneered and said, "Don't worry. When I spread the news, cultivators from all over the world will definitely flock here. At that time, Chindu Peak will definitely be very lively." Ding Nan's eyes lit up. "Then we can fish in troubled waters?" Zheng Yuan and Ding Nan looked at each other and laughed at the same time. This was the second night watch after yesterday. Today the 2 night watch periods would be as usual. Chapter 568. Due to the presence of Chris, John and Alba who couldn't fly, Su Chan and Zhou Qin didn't arrive at Mount Huangshan until it was almost evening. They went to the internet. 7 km. Although Chris, John and Alba couldn't fly, with the help of Su Chan and Zhou Qin, they successfully sneaked into the closed tourist attraction of Mount Huangshan. It was the first time for Chris, John and Alba to see Mount Huangshan, which was known as the first mountain in the world. Although it was evening, the magnificent Mount Huangshan seemed to be covered with a layer of red gauze under the blood-red setting sun, still showing a different kind of charm and boldness. Chris and the others were so amazed that they almost forgot why they had come. They all opened their eyes wide and took pictures of the scenery with their cameras in their hands. However, Zhou Qin and Su Chan didn't have the leisure to travel, especially Su Chan. She looked around and said to Zhou Qin, "Sister Zhou Qin, where is this Pine Valley cottage?" Zhou Qin looked up and saw a map sign not far away. She quickly approached it, glanced at it and said, "We are now in the Yuping Scenic Area. Pine Valley Cottage is in the Pine Valley Scenic Area, which is quite far from here. Let's go quickly while the sky is still bright. When it gets dark it will be difficult to travel." Su Chan nodded and said, "Yes, let's go quickly." Zhou Qin turned to Chris and said, "We are going to Pine Valley Cottage. You have to hurry up and keep up with us. Can you do that?" Before Chris could speak, John rushed to pat his chest and said, "No problem, we can definitely keep up." Zhou Qin smiled disapprovingly and said, "Let's wait and see." As she spoke, she nodded to Su Chan. The two girls suddenly jumped up and were already a few meters away in the blink of an eye. John, Alba and Chris were stunned. Alba said in astonishment, "Oh my God, are they spiritual monkeys?" John also widened his eyes and said, "No, they are women." After a moment of surprise, Chris suddenly became extremely excited. Her eyes flashed and she said, "They are challenging us. Let's go, let's keep up. We can't give up." John immediately rubbed his palms together and shouted. He took the lead and rushed out, followed by Chris and Alba. Zhou Qin and Su Chan were extremely fast. Zhou Qin was usually running wildly on the stone steps of the mountain road like a cheetah. Su Chan on the other hand had a light body. From time to time she would jump and climb, choosing the shortest distance to jump. She was really like a nimble fox. At first, Chris and the others could barely keep up, but soon they could only look at Su Chan and Zhou Qin's backs and sigh, especially Alba. Although she was the cheerleader of the University of Pennsylvania, she was, after all, a delicate girl. After running for a few miles, she felt like her lungs were about to explode. She was out of breath and couldn't keep up with Su Chan and Zhou Qin's pace at all. Alba gasped violently and lamented in pain, "God, they're not human at all. How can they keep up?" Chris was also out of breath, but she still turned around and cheered Alba on. "Alba, come on, hold on a little longer. We're almost there." Alba said with a sad face, "I can't run anymore. I really can't run anymore." Seeing that Alba was almost kneeling on the ground, Chris had no choice but to turn her head helplessly and shout at Zhou Qin in the distance, "Zhou Qin, wait a minute." Chris's voice was clear and spread far away. It was particularly harsh in the quiet valley in the evening. Zhou Qin stopped and ran back quickly. Although she was running fast and fiercely, her face did not change. She was still breathing steadily and her face was as usual. She asked, "What's wrong?" Chris said with a wry smile, "Alba can't run anymore. Can you slow down?" However, Zhou Qin said with a serious face, "If you really want to learn cultivation, you must remember one thing. In your life you must cultivate all the time. If you can't hold on to such a small thing, how can you cultivate? Ask her, does she really want to cultivate? If she doesn't, it's not too late to go back the way we came. If she wants to cultivate, she must keep up. No matter what difficulties there are ahead, she must grit her teeth and overcome them." Chris looked embarrassed and said, But before she could finish her words, Zhou Qin turned around and continued to run forward without saying a word. Chris looked at Hardadef helplessly. Hardadef shrugged his shoulders, helped Alba up and said, "Forget it, I'll take her with me. I hope they can slow down a little so that we can keep up." Chris sighed. She glanced at Mount Huangshan, which was gradually shrouded in darkness. Suddenly she felt as if she had entered a completely strange world. She murmured in a low voice, "I hope I made the right choice." With that she forced herself to cheer up and said, "Let's go. We can't let them look down on us." Encouraged by Hardedef, Alba gritted her teeth and kept up. Seeing that the three of them were too slow, Zhou Qin and Su Chan had to slow down. But even so, Hardedef and Chris were almost exhausted by their speed. Alba staggered all the way, almost crying in pain. In the end she was like a snail. The five of them walked for a while and gradually it was completely dark. Alba finally couldn't stand it anymore. She sat down on the cold stone steps and cried, "Jesus Christ, who can save me? I really can't walk anymore. Just kill me." Hardedef and Chris were also sweating profusely, as if they had just been fished out of a soup pot. Even the strong Hardedef was so tired that he was panting like an ox. He wanted to fall to the ground and never get up again. At this time, Su Chan used a fire magic and found a torch for illumination. Zhou Qin walked up to them and said to Chris, who was gasping for breath, "Can you still go on?" At this time, Chris couldn't force herself. She waved her hand and wanted to speak, but her mouth was so dry that she couldn't speak. Zhou Qin frowned and said, "Is that all you can do?" Hardedef said with a sad face, "Is this how you cultivate? This is too painful, isn't it?" At this time Su Chan came over with the torch and said, "Is this pain? Do you know what kind of hardship Sister Zhou Qin has suffered on the journey of cultivation? She almost lost her life several times. But didn't she still get through it? Cultivation is to constantly challenge yourself in order to surpass your limits. You can't even overcome this little difficulty. Do you still want to worship my Yundong as your master? Stop dreaming." Hardedef and Chris looked at each other, and Hardedef said in a low voice, "Chris, can you still walk? Do you want me to pull you along?" Chris shook her head stubbornly. "No, I'll walk by myself. You help Alba." However, Alba cried and shouted, No, I won't leave again even if you kill me." She simply lay on the cold ground and put on a posture of refusing to obey. Seeing this, Su Chan said to Zhou Qin in a low voice, "Sister Zhou Qin, this is not the way. When will it take? If it were just the two of us, we would have arrived long ago. Don't let Yundong leave by the time we arrive at Pine Valley Cottage." Zhou Qin thought for a while and said, "Let them wait for us here. We'll leave a mark here and come back to find them later." When Chris and Hardedef heard their conversation, they were shocked and hurriedly said, "No, of course we have to leave together. So late. Aren't you afraid that something will happen to us if you leave us here?" Zhou Qin looked at Alba and said, "What about her? Didn't she refuse to leave?" Chris smiled bitterly and said, "I'll try to persuade her again." As she said this, she turned her head and whispered to Alba. However, no matter what Chris said, Alba still covered her ears and shook her head desperately. She refused to get up. Seeing this, Chris gritted her teeth and said to Hardedef, "Hardedef, let's go. Don't worry about her." Hardedef was shocked. Leave Alba here alone?" Chris sneered and said, "Who asked her to come with us alone? This was her own choice. She can't wander around here. We'll come back to find her later." Hardedef was furious and was about to argue, but he saw Chris winking at him. Hardedef's heart skipped a beat and he closed his mouth as if he understood something. He said to Alba, "Alba, wait for us here. We'll come back to find you." As he said this, he left some of his luggage and dry food to Alba, and then went into the night with Zhou Qin, Su Chan and Chris. At first, Alba didn't believe that the two of them would dare to leave her alone, but after a while she saw that it was so dark that she couldn't even see her own fingers. The sound of birds and insects came from the jungle. There seemed to be some hidden beasts staring at her in the darkness, which made her hair stand on end. Alba couldn't help but think of the joke Hardedef and Chris had made on the plane. She was shocked and thought to herself, "They won't really leave me behind, will they?" Human beings were born to be social animals, and they were most afraid of being alone, especially in the dark. Alba only held on for a while before she almost collapsed. She couldn't help screaming, crying as she stumbled after them. After running for a while, she saw Su Chan, Zhou Qin, Chris and Hardedef looking at her from a corner with a faint smile. Although Alba knew that she had been fooled, she still cried with lingering fear and followed them through the mountains, not daring to complain anymore. They walked for a while. When they were about to reach the Pine Valley scenic area, Chris, who was gasping violently with her head raised, suddenly saw a few blue lights flashing across the sky. She pointed to the sky and said, "Look, meteors." Hardedef and Alba both looked up, panting. Before they had time to laugh, they heard Su Chan say in surprise, "Are there cultivators coming?" Zhou Qin's face was also solemn. "It seems so, but I don't know which sect they are from." Chris and John looked at each other, unsure of what they were talking about. They listened to the two of them continue to talk in confusion. Su Chan sighed and said, "How long will it be before we reach the Pine Valley Cottage? Why do I feel that the mountain is so far away?" Zhou Qin also sighed slightly. "It should be soon, but I think we should be more worried about who came just now." Su Chan thought for a moment and said, "Could it be Sister Ziyuan?" Zhou Qin shook her head subconsciously and said, "I don't think so. If it were her, she would have either arrived a long time ago or not come at all. She wouldn't have arrived just now." As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a cold snort coming from the dark forest not far away. Chris and Hardadef immediately looked in the direction of the voice nervously and shouted with hostility, "Who's there?" Zhou Qin and Su Chan were very familiar with this voice. They shouted in surprise at the same time, "Ziyuan?" Sure enough, a woman in a white dress slowly walked out of the night. With the help of the night, Ziyuan's figure seemed to be faintly discernible. The cold moonlight shone on her cheeks, making her face look quite cold. It was completely unlike her usual gentle and peaceful self. Su Chan and Zhou Qin looked at each other and smiled embarrassedly, like two children who had done something bad and had been caught by their parents. Su Chan smiled awkwardly and said, "Sister Ziyuan, why are you here?" Ziyuan glared at her angrily, then quickly glanced at Zhou Qin and shouted in a low voice, "Why am I here? I should be asking you. Didn't Li Yundong tell you not to follow me? Why didn't you listen to him?" Zhou Qin's heart skipped a beat and she said shamelessly, "Aren't you here too?" Ziyuan said angrily, "I'm here to chase you back." Zhou Qin braced herself and said, "Isn't the result the same? You're here anyway." Ziyuan said angrily, "Yuk." Seeing that things were not going well, Su Chan quickly tried to smooth things over. "Sister Ziyuan, don't be angry. We know we were wrong, but things have come to this, so let's not talk about it anymore. Have you found Yundong?" Ziyuan snorted, turned her face away and said, "No." Seeing that Ziyuan was no longer entangled in this matter, Zhou Qin secretly breathed a sigh of relief. She also took the opportunity to get out of the situation and said, "Were there a few cultivators flying in the sky just now?" Although Ziyuan was unhappy, she didn't want to have a bad relationship with Zhou Qin, so she said, "It should be. I think they went in the direction of Pine Valley Cottage. I went to Pine Valley Cottage before and found Lin Xueqing, the disciple of the master of Pine Valley Cottage, but she said that Li Yundong and Wang Jinyuan were not here." "What?" Su Chan and Zhou Qin exclaimed in unison. Ziyuan frowned slightly and said, "I also think it's very strange. I always feel that the two of them are lying and hiding something." Su Chan thought for a moment and said, "Why don't we go to Pine Valley Cottage again? Maybe it was Yundong and Master Wan just now." Ziyuan thought for a moment and said, "Well, let's do that. Anyway, this place is not far from Pine Valley Cottage." As she said this, she looked at Chris and the others with a kind smile on her face and said, "It's not easy for you to get here. Can you hold on a little longer?" John, Chris, and Alba looked at each other. Chris gritted her teeth and said, "No problem." Ziyuan nodded and took the lead to continue walking forward. After walking for about half an hour, they finally arrived near Pine Valley Cottage. Chris and the others felt so tired that their bodies were about to fall apart. They fell to the ground like a pool of mud. Just as Ziyuan, Su Chan, and Zhou Qin were about to help them up, they suddenly heard a voice coming from the direction of Pine Valley Cottage. The three of them were shocked. They looked at each other and jumped to the side of Pine Valley Cottage. Under the cover of the dense jungle and the cold moonlight, they looked in the direction of Pine Valley Cottage. At the gate of Pine Valley Cottage, Zhong Qingsong looked at Jing Yuan in surprise and asked, "Jinren Jing, why are you back?" Jing Yuan laughed and said, "Brother Zhong, you are not kind." Zhong Qingsong asked curiously, "Jinren Jing, what are you talking about? How am I not kind?" Jing Yuan looked at Zhong Qingsong with a faint smile and said, "Master Wan is refining pills on Tiandu Peak. It's such an important thing, but you didn't tell me. Do you think you are kind?" Zhong Qingsong was shocked. "Jinren Jing, what do you mean? How could Master Wan be here?" Jing Yuan laughed and said, "Are you still reluctant to tell me? Humph, I've been treating you as a friend in vain." After that, he suddenly took out a jade rui from his long sleeve and shouted, "Zhong Qingsong." As soon as his voice fell, a few ferocious ghosts flew out of the jade rui and pounced on Zhong Qingsong with a roar. Zhong Qingsong was shocked. Just as he was about to turn around and run away, he saw Lin Xueqing looking at him in horror. Zhong Qingsong only had time to shout at Lin Xueqing, "Run!" before his soul was dragged out of his body by Zheng Yuan's Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade. Zheng Yuan took Zhong Qingsong's soul away in the blink of an eye. He looked at Lin Xueqing, who was stunned with a grim smile on his face. Just as he was about to call out the soul again, he suddenly found that Lin Xueqing's eyes seemed to have found a glimmer of hope in a desperate situation. She looked behind him with ecstasy. Zheng Yuan's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head and saw 3 beautiful women with frightened faces in the jungle. They were Zi Yuan, Su Chan, and Zhou Qin. When Zheng Yuan saw the 3 of them at a glance, his heart suddenly shook. He knew that these 3 women had always been close to Li Yundong. Since they had appeared, Li Yundong must be nearby. Among the 3 women, Su Chan and Zhou Qin had the closest relationship with Li Yundong. He could capture them and use them to threaten Li Yundong. Zi Yuan was the strongest. As long as he defeated her in one fell swoop, he would definitely be able to capture the remaining 2 easily. Thinking of this, Zheng Yuan grinned and no longer cared about Lin Xueqing. He shouted at Zi Yuan, "Zi Yuan!" As soon as his voice fell, the ghosts in the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade roared and rushed toward Zi Yuan. Chapter 569. Zheng Yuan shouted loudly, making Su Chan and Zhou Qin feel as if their souls were about to fly out of their bodies. Zi Yuan was so scared that she shivered all over. Even though she was usually calm and composed, when she suddenly saw the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade pouncing on her, she couldn't help but turn pale with fright. In an instant she flew far away. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. Zheng Yuan, on the other hand, wanted to catch Zi Yuan first, and then catch Zhou Qin and Su Chan, so he immediately chased after her. Zheng Yuan's Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade was an extremely vicious, powerful magical weapon. It was unstoppable when used when others were caught off guard. However, Zi Yuan happened to have seen him use it before, so she was on guard. Moreover, she was one of the few cultivators in the cultivation world who had studied powerful magical weapons and magic very well, so she knew the shortcomings and advantages of the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade. Zi Yuan's figure flashed far away in an instant. As she dodged the roaring undead and Zheng Yuan, she quickly sent a voice transmission to Su Chan. "Su Chan, take Zhou Qin and Chris and run." The weakness of this Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is that it can only capture one person's soul at a time, and it can only lock onto the target within 50 feet. I'll hold Zheng Yuan back now. You guys run. Su Chan was stunned and quickly told Zhou Qin what she had said. Although Zhou Qin was still in a state of shock, she was, after all, a lady from a noble family who had seen great storms. She took a deep breath and immediately calmed down. She thought quickly and said, "No, Zi Yuan can't handle it alone." Since Zi Yuan said that Zheng Yuan's powerful magical weapon can only target one person at a time, why don't Zi Yuan be in charge of luring the enemy while you and I attack from the side? Su Chan was stunned for a moment, then her eyes lit up and she said loudly, "Good idea." But she quickly added, "However, Sister Zhou Qin, your yang spirit is not proficient in flying, so you can't go. Otherwise, if Zheng Yuan turns around and attacks you, it will be bad. Why don't I cooperate with Sister Zi Yuan? I'm fast so he can't catch me." Zhou Qin thought for a moment. She also knew that this was not the time to argue, so she said decisively, "Okay. Be careful. I'll take Chris and the others away first so that they won't be a burden to you." Su Chan nodded and quickly flew into the air, rushing towards Zheng Yuan. Although Zheng Yuan was older, his cultivation was not much higher than Zi Yuan's. Therefore he could never catch up with her in terms of speed. He was always a distance away from her, especially with the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade in his hand. It was always a step away from Zi Yuan, but he could never catch up with her. Just as Zheng Yuan was getting angry, he suddenly felt a gust of wind coming from the side. He turned his head and saw Su Chan approaching him like a ghost, holding a hairpin in her hand and stabbing it into his waist. Zheng Yuan hadn't expected that a 3-tailed fox spirit like Su Chan would dare to offend him. He was furious and couldn't care less about anything else. He mobilized the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade and pointed it at Su Chan, shouting, "Su Chan!" Su Chan was so scared that her whole body trembled. Without thinking, she turned around and ran. Before the ghost of the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade could reach her, she disappeared in the blink of an eye. In the world, if a fox spirit said that she was the second best at escaping, no one would dare to say that they were the best. Su Chan was even more cunning. When she made up her mind to escape, she really disappeared without a trace. Her speed was even faster than Zi Yuan's. Zheng Yuan hadn't expected Su Chan to be so fast. He was stunned for a moment. The ghost of the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade whistled past him and chased after Su Chan. At this time, Ziyuan also came to her senses in the distance. After the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade had flown far away, she immediately drove her ninth heaven Ziyuan silk to attack Jing Yuan. Only then did Jing Yuan realize that this was their guerrilla tactic of, when the enemy advances I retreat, when the enemy retreats I advance. Feeling ashamed and angry, he immediately gritted his teeth and controlled the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade to fight with Ziyuan's powerful magical weapon. For a moment, the three of them were engaged in a fierce battle in mid-air. Ziyuan and Jing Yuan were fighting from a distance. As soon as she saw the ghost pouncing on her, she turned around and ran away. When the distance was wide enough, Su Chan suddenly appeared and attacked Jing Yuan fiercely. Although Su Chan's cultivation was not high, she was still a cultivator in the Zhuji phase. Moreover, she was attacking the vital parts. If Jing Yuan was hit, he would definitely not be able to bear it. However, Jing Yuan didn't have enough powerful magical weapons at hand, so he couldn't fight two people at the same time. If he concentrated his strength on one person, the other would take advantage of it. Lin Xueqing in particular, had also recovered from the grief of losing her master. She let out an angry roar and rushed forward like crazy. For a moment, the four of them were fighting back and forth in the air. At this time, Zhou Qin quickly returned to Chris, John and Alba and said to them, "Let's go." Chris and the other two had no idea what was going on. John asked blankly, "What happened?" Zhou Qin urged anxiously with a sullen face, "Don't ask. If you want to live, leave quickly." Chris raised her head and looked at the four people fighting in the air with the help of the moonlight. She was stunned, and for a moment, her feet seemed to have been rooted to the ground and she couldn't move at all. Alba also asked with a blank face, "What happened?" As soon as she finished speaking, a thunderous roar suddenly came from the sky. It was Jing Yuan, who had seen through Lin Xueqing's anger and eagerness for revenge. With a loud roar, the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade instantly locked onto her figure, rushed into her body, and hooked out all her 3 souls and 7 spirits. As soon as Lin Xueqing's soul was gone, her body immediately fell straight to the ground, right in front of Alba with a bang, and was badly mutilated. Alba was so shocked that her body froze. She touched her face with trembling hands, only to see a few drops of hot blood stuck to her face, which was scarlet and ferocious. Alba couldn't help but let out a shrill scream. As if she had infinite strength, she turned around and fled. Although Chris was also trembling with fear at the scene in front of her, she was still calm and quickly shouted, "Alba, don't run around." Alba, on the other hand, was so frightened that she had lost her mind. She ran all the way in extreme panic and kept falling down. After falling down, she got up in a hurry and then fell down again. Chris stamped her feet and immediately chased after her. John hurriedly shouted, "Chris?" Zhou Qin saw that although they were running away in panic, they had finally moved. She shouted at John, "Stop shouting and catch up with them." John seemed to wake up from a dream and hurriedly chased after them. Of the 4 of them, one was running desperately in front, while the other 2 were chasing after her desperately. Zhou Qin was looking around vigilantly, chasing after her while retreating. Under the stimulation of death, people could always stimulate their infinite potential. Alba, who had been so tired that she was about to collapse, was running like crazy at this time as if she didn't know fatigue. She ran wherever she could and in a panic she ran into the Huangshan cableway. By the time Chris and John, who were chasing after her, came to their senses, they had already run into the Huangshan cableway. They were halfway up the mountain and the strong wind was blowing around them. The chains of the cableway were clanking, and they felt as if they were stepping on waves and would be knocked down at any time. Chris and John grabbed the chain of the ropeway in horror and shouted at Alba, "Alba, stop. Do you want to die? Look around." At this time, Alba's potential had been overdrawn. When she heard the shouts of Chris and John, she immediately stopped and looked around blankly. She saw that on one side of her was a steep cliff, and on the other side was a dark abyss. She was in a steep, high-altitude cableway. Alba gasped violently and stuck her head out of the cableway to take a look. She saw that there was an abyss under her feet, like the bloody mouth of a demon, which would swallow her at any time. Especially at this time, a gust of wind blew, causing the cableway to sway like a huge wave, almost throwing Alba over. Alba was so shocked that her legs went soft. Her body involuntarily tilted and she fell down the cliff. When Chris and John saw this, they screamed in horror and collapsed on the ropeway. Behind them, Zhou Qin's heart suddenly tightened. She gritted her teeth and rushed over. Like a startled swan, she quickly flashed to Alba's side. At this time, Alba's body had already fallen out of the cableway. Without thinking, Zhou Qin immediately jumped out of the cableway and grabbed Alba's arms with both hands as if she were fishing for the moon. Then she hooked her ankle hard on the iron chain of the cableway and stabilized her body. Zhou Qin grabbed Alba by a hair's breadth and hung upside down on the cableway. She gritted her teeth, shook her wrist and shouted, "Go up." Alba was immediately thrown onto the cableway like a sandbag. Chris and John saw it accurately, so they reached out at the same time and hurriedly caught Alba. At this time, Alba was already scared out of her wits. She was trembling all over, her limbs trembling, and she couldn't even stand up. Chris and John saw that Zhou Qin, who was hanging upside down on the cableway, suddenly turned and jumped up from under the cableway like a swallow. Americans worshipped heroes the most. Although Chris and John were still in shock, they couldn't help but exclaim in admiration and surprise. Their eyes involuntarily showed strong worship. But before they could speak, they heard a burst of sparse applause coming from the end of the cableway. Curious, Chris and John turned their heads and saw a fashionably and sexily dressed woman walking toward them with a sneer on her face, clapping her hands. The woman's eyes were fixed on Zhou Qin. Her hands were clapping slower and harder as if death was approaching. She sneered and said, "Good skills, good kung fu. No wonder you've jumped several times." As she said this, she poked her head out of the cableway and took a look. She smiled and said, "No wonder you're so high. You're not afraid at all." Zhou Qin suddenly saw the woman and frowned. She said in a low voice, "Ding Nan. Why are you here?" The woman was Ding Nan. She sneered at Zhou Qin and said, "If you can be here, why can't I?" Zhou Qin saw that Ding Nan's eyes were full of hostility and murderous intent. She asked warily, "What are you doing here?" Ding Nan laughed and said, "What am I doing here?" As she said this, Ding Nan's face suddenly became extremely ferocious. She snapped, "What am I doing? I'm here to kill you." Chapter 570. Ding Nan's appearance made the Huangshan cableway look murderous under the night sky. Zhou Qin looked at Ding Nan coldly and said in a deep voice, "Ding Nan, what kind of grudge do we have? Do we have to solve it at this time?" Ding Nan smiled coldly. She looked around and said, "Isn't this place good? The moon is dark and the wind is strong. It's a good time to kill and set fire." Zhou Qin watched Ding Nan approach step by step. She quickly winked at Alba, who was paralyzed on the suspension bridge, and whispered, "Let's go." However, Alba was so scared that her whole body was weak. She couldn't even stand up, let alone walk away. She had almost died just now, and at this moment she was holding the iron chain desperately and refused to let go. How could she move at all? Zhou Qin frowned and shouted to Chris and Hardedef, "Take her and leave." Chris and John looked at Ding Nan blankly and then at Zhou Qin. It seemed that they couldn't understand why the two sisters, who had been inseparable in the past, had suddenly turned against each other. "Go to the internet." Zhou Qin saw that the two of them were also staring at her blankly. She immediately shouted and roared, "Are you deaf? Go. Do you want to die?" Chris and John were shocked by Zhou Qin's words. They subconsciously wanted to help Alba stand up, but Ding Nan laughed and said, "You want to leave? Did you ask for my permission?" After that, a golden light flashed in her hand, and a golden electric light pierced toward Chris. Zhou Qin's pupils suddenly shrank, and her hand quickly reached for her waist. With a swoosh, the Vulcan's whip, like a poisonous snake, swung toward the golden light. With a snap, the Vulcan's whip accurately hit the golden light in the air, making a crisp sound like a firecracker. The golden light was hit and suddenly shook. It spun a few times and flew toward Ding Nan, then stopped steadily beside her. It was a golden hairpin, which was Mo Ashi's threaded hairpin of soul traversal. Zhou Qin stared at the threaded hairpin of soul traversal beside Ding Nan with vigilance. She said with some surprise, "You've reached the Zhuji phase? Is this your powerful magical weapon?" Ding Nan laughed out loud and said proudly, "Zhou Qin, do you think that I will always be like a shadow, always following behind you and being overshadowed by your light? Let me tell you, sooner or later I, Ding Nan, will surpass you, defeat you and trample you under my feet. I'll let you have a taste of the humiliation I suffered back then." Zhou Qin looked at her former classmate and friend in front of her with a complicated look in her eyes. She suddenly had a sense of vicissitudes of life, as if the days when she and Ding Nan were inseparable from each other on campus were swaying before her eyes in a trance, vivid in her mind as if they were within reach. But Ding Nan in front of her looked so familiar, but Zhou Qin felt so strange. It wasn't that Zhou Qin didn't know that they would eventually become enemies, that they would eventually turn against each other, and that they would eventually become mortal enemies. But she hadn't expected that this day would come so quickly and so suddenly. Zhou Qin shook her head secretly and sighed softly. "Dingnan, why are you doing this?" As she said this, she took a deep breath and a cold light bloomed in her eyes. She said, "Let them go. Don't involve them in the grudge between the two of us." Dingnan smiled coldly. "Have you ever thought about the grudge between you and Zhao Yujin? Don't you want to drag me into it?" As she said this, she suddenly opened her eyes and pointed at Chris and the others. The threaded hairpin of soul traversal beside her suddenly turned into countless golden lights, rushing toward Chris, John, and Alba like a torrential rain. At this time, Chris and the others saw countless golden hairpins suddenly appear in the air and stab them. Any one of them would definitely make a bloody hole in their bodies. The three foreigners had come from a foreign country. They hadn't expected that their cultivation journey, which they thought would be smooth sailing, would turn out to be such a terrible thing. Just when they thought that they were going to die, they suddenly heard the sound of the wind whistling in their ears. Then, a fiery red snake quickly flew in front of them, forming an impenetrable barrier that firmly blocked the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. However, after the threaded hairpin of soul traversal was blocked and scattered in all directions, it quickly turned back and quickly jumped up along the Vulcan's whip in Zhou Qin's hand. Like a small snake swimming along the vines, it quickly attacked Zhou Qin's wrist. Zhou Qin frowned and immediately shook her wrist. With a swoosh, the long whip in her hand shook straight like a long spear. In an instant, a strong Yuanin Qi was penetrated through the whip, and it shook the threaded hairpin of soul traversal that was swimming along the long whip into pieces. The fight between Zhou Qin and Ding Nan only lasted for a split second. Chris, John, and Alba saw the golden light and the red light in front of them fighting. The scene was even more thrilling and exciting than a Hollywood blockbuster. But in the blink of an eye, they saw that the surroundings had returned to normal, as if what they had just seen was just an illusion. John was tongue-tied and stammered, "God, are all the people in China superhuman?" Chris also widened her eyes and stared at Zhou Qin, her eyes full of fanaticism and excitement. Only Alba's eyes were full of remorse. She hated herself for coming to this terrible country and encountering such a terrible thing. For a moment, she burst into tears, and her cries echoed continuously on the silent Huangshan cableway. However, Zhou Qin didn't seem to hear her crying. All her attention was locked on Ding Nan. She said lightly, "Ding Nan, give up. Go back and cultivate for a while before coming back. You are no match for me. With my Vulcan's whip in hand, you are already no match for me. When I take out the Chiwei, you will definitely die." Ding Nan didn't buy it at all. She sneered and said, "Who said I was going to fight with you? Do you think I'm a fool?" As she said this, she smiled coldly. The threaded hairpin of soul traversal beside her suddenly flashed and instantly flew more than 10 meters behind Zhou Qin. The golden light flashed a few times, and there was a clanging sound of iron cutting in the distance. Zhou Qin was shocked and said angrily, "Ding Nan, you are too vicious." However, Ding Nan laughed and said, "I'm vicious? When you pushed me down the stairs, did you ever think about how vicious you were?" At this time, Zhou Qin had no time to defend herself. The connection of the cableway more than 10 meters behind her had been completely cut off by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. Even if she used the Vulcan's whip, it would be too late for her to stop it. Just as the threaded hairpin of soul traversal cut off the last iron nail of the cableway behind Zhou Qin, she suddenly felt her body sink down. Zhou Qin's mind raced, and her reaction was astonishingly fast. At this time she was not proficient in flying, and there was the threat of Ding Nan in front of her. Therefore she immediately shook her wrist, and the tip of the whip quickly wrapped around the rock behind her. At the same time she shouted to Chris and the others, "Hold on." As soon as she finished speaking, the cableway under her feet suddenly fell. Chris, John, and Alba let out a shrill scream at the same time and fell into the abyss like meteorites. Zhou Qin was quick to react. She reached out and grabbed Chris with a snap. Chris also grabbed Hardadef. When Hardadef saw a person falling next to him, he also subconsciously grabbed Alba's clothes. The four of them hung in the air like a string of gourds, swaying back and forth against the cliff wall as if they were swinging back and forth. Although Zhou Qin's Jindan body was stronger than ordinary people's, she still felt a little overwhelmed by supporting the strength of 3 adults with one hand. What's more, at this time they were facing a powerful enemy. Her hands were tied, so she had no power to fight back. Zhou Qin gritted her teeth and immediately used the strength of the 4 of them to swing back and forth. She suddenly swung her hand and shouted, "Go up." With this swing, Chris, John, and Alba were thrown into the air like sandbags. They were dislocated one after another. Alba fell on the cableway behind Ding Nan. The pain made her limbs feel like they were about to fall apart. She lay on the cableway and kept crying for a while. Chris's body was still in the air when she discovered that there was a pine tree sticking out from a crack in the rock in front of her. She immediately reacted quickly and used both hands to hug the tree trunk, stopping her body in midair. As soon as she held the tree trunk firmly, she saw John flying past her. Chris immediately reached out and grabbed him. However, John was tall, strong and heavy. The pine tree on the cliff had to bear the strength of two people at once, and it suddenly made a creaking sound. It was so horrible that it made people's hair stand on end. Chris and John, who were still in a state of shock, felt their hair stand on end. At this moment of life and death, the two of them stared blankly at the pine tree that was breaking apart bit by bit. Their eyes stared fixedly at the roots that were being pulled out of the cracks bit by their strength. At this moment, they could smell the sinister breathing of the Grim Reaper. John suddenly turned his head, and his voice became extremely calm. He said to Chris, "Chris, promise me one thing." An ominous thought flashed through Chris's mind. She immediately said in horror, "No, John, what do you want to do?" Hardedef looked at Chris with incomparable seriousness and said, "Chris, you're the smartest and have the best qualifications. Master will definitely take you as a disciple. If you also go to heaven in the future, if you have the chance, you must tell me, what kind of feeling is cultivation?" As he said this, John smiled slightly at Chris and suddenly let go of his hands. Chris suddenly let out a heart-wrenching scream. "No." She suddenly reached out and tried to grab John, but she grabbed his sleeve and tore it off with a ripping sound. John's body still fell, and in the blink of an eye, he was swallowed up by the abyss. For a moment, the night wind in the valley was howling and Chris's cries echoed. At this time, Alba was so frightened that she forgot to cry. She stared blankly at the dark and boundless abyss, as if she had frozen into a statue. At this time, Zhou Qin wanted to save John, but it was too late. She could only watch him fall into the cliff valley. Zhou Qin suddenly became furious and shouted, "Ding Nan, you deserve to die." With a shake of her wrist, Zhou Qin's body suddenly burst forward. There was an amazing force between her legs, and her whole body was almost at a perpendicular angle to the rock surface. Her feet stepped on the steep cliff, and she rushed toward Ding Nan like crazy. Chapter 571. Ding Nan had always had a natural fear and inferiority complex towards Zhou Qin. This fear and inferiority complex came from the depths of her heart, so much so that she refused to admit it herself. Go to the internet. 7KOM. At first, this fear and inferiority complex stemmed from Zhou Qin's powerful background and family, but slowly their fates changed and they both became cultivators. Even so, Ding Nan was extremely unwilling to accept that Zhou Qin could still suppress her in cultivation. Especially after the Taoist assembly, Zhou Qin's fierce and desperate style had greatly shocked Ding Nan, which made her subconsciously believe that she could not beat Zhou Qin, so she had to use despicable means to have a little hope of winning. For the sake of this tiny hope of winning, Ding Nan wouldn't mind a few people dying, even if they were once her classmates. Therefore, when Ding Nan saw Zhou Qin suddenly become furious and desperate, she immediately took a few steps back in fear. She didn't dare to fight her head-on at all and subconsciously wanted to escape. However, Ding Nan had only taken a few steps back when she saw Alba not far away, staring blankly at the dark abyss of the cliff valley. She suddenly had an idea. Her figure flashed, and her 5 fingers were like hooks as she quickly grabbed Alba's throat. Ding Nan shouted sternly, "How dare you kill me? I'll kill her right now." At this time, Zhou Qin had just rushed in front of her, and the Vulcan's whip in her hand almost tore the air and flung it at Ding Nan's face. Seeing that Ding Nan had taken Alba hostage, Zhou Qin immediately shook her wrist, and the Vulcan's whip brushed past Ding Nan's cheek and Alba's body. With a bang, it hit the cliff wall, smashing the hard rock into pieces and countless gravel splashed everywhere. Zhou Qin was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She approached Ding Nan step by step on the ropeway and said angrily, "Ding Nan, are you crazy? Have you lost your humanity?" Ding Nan laughed angrily and dragged Alba back step by step. She said, "I've lost my humanity? When you pushed me downstairs, did you have any humanity?" Zhou Qin was furious. "Did I push you? It was obviously your own mistake." Ding Nan said angrily, "What's the difference between that and you pushing me?" Agitated, Ding Nan tightened her grip on Alba's throat. Alba's face immediately turned purple and she struggled desperately, But Ding Nan's fingers were like iron hooks strangling her throat, making it impossible for her to break free. Zhou Qin immediately slowed down. She took a deep breath and said in a cold voice, "Ding Nan, do you think Zhao Yujin would have let you go even if I had jumped down myself? Even if Zhao Yujin let you go, do you think my family would let you go? If I die, you and your family will die. If I live, your family will live a better life. Life and death, it's a simple multiple-choice question. Tell me, if you were me, what would you choose?" Ding Nan trembled all over and shouted hysterically, "But why is it that poor people like me always die while rich people like you live? Why was that? Who can tell me why?" Zhou Qin said angrily, "Is poverty the reason for your madness? Li Yundong is much poorer than you. Have you ever seen him go crazy? Ding Nan, put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha immediately. Hurry up and turn back. It's not too late. Don't wait until your hands are stained with blood. It will be too late to turn back." Tears fell from Ding Nan's eyes, but she giggled. Her voice was strange and creepy. She cried and laughed at the same time and said, "It's too late. Ever since you became Li Yundong's disciple and I became Jing Yuan's disciple, everything has been too late. Can you turn back time and start over? No, no matter how powerful you are, you can't." As she said this, she dragged Alba back step by step. Her eyes gradually became cold and she warned Zhou Qin, "If you come any closer, I will kill her. However, you must remember that it was you who forced her to die." Zhou Qin knew that if she went forward and grabbed Alba by force, she would definitely die. Although she sometimes had an iron-blooded and ruthless side, she was not born cold-blooded. Otherwise, she would not have let Ding Nan go when she betrayed her. Zhou Qin gritted her teeth and watched helplessly as Alba was dragged into the deep night by Ding Nan. At this time, Chris, who had been trapped in the tree, screamed in despair, "No. Let her go." But as soon as Chris's voice fell, a golden light flashed like lightning in the thick night, stabbing toward Chris. Zhou Qin immediately shook her wrist and hit the golden light. However, the golden light seemed to have expected Zhou Qin's reaction. It instantly turned, bypassed the Vulcan's whip, and went straight through the pine that Chris was holding. The pine had been dragged loosely by John and Chris and was about to break at any time. Now that it was penetrated, it suddenly broke with a crack. Chrissy let out a scream and her body instantly fell. Zhou Qin was quick to react. With a shake of the Vulcan's whip, the whip wrapped around Chris's waist. She glanced at a protruding boulder not far away and said to Chris, "Go grab that stone." Chris only felt her body lighten as she flew to the front of the boulder. She immediately hugged the boulder with both hands and finally rolled back from the jaws of death, surviving. After Zhou Qin saved Chris, she roared angrily, "Ding Nan, can't you let these innocent people go?" Ding Nan laughed out loud and said, "Then just give up and let me kill you." Zhou Qin gritted her teeth and sneered. "In your dreams." Ding Nan snorted and said, "Then don't blame me for being rude." As she spoke, she hid in the dark and controlled the threaded hairpin of soul traversal to attack Zhou Qin. Because Zhou Qin had come out in a hurry, she hadn't brought Zai, a powerful magical weapon that was obviously a controlled knife, with her. She didn't have a 7-treasure bag like Li Yundong, so she only brought the Vulcan's whip with her. At this time, dealing with the attack of the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, although it was more than enough to protect herself, Ding Nan would attack Chris, who was trapped on the boulder, from time to time. This time, Zhou Qin no longer had the strength to fight back. The more she fought, the more difficult it was for her, and the angrier she became. Although Zhou Qin was angry, she was quickly thinking of countermeasures. Just as she was thinking, she suddenly heard a loud rumbling sound coming from Chindu Peak not far away, as if countless dragons and tigers were roaring in unison. A colorful glow rose into the sky, and the light went straight to the sky, its power piercing through the 9 heavens. This abnormality immediately attracted Zhou Qin and Ding Nan's attention. They had never seen such a magical scene before, and for a moment, they were both dumbfounded. For a moment, Chris also forgot her dangerous situation and the tragedy that had befallen John and Alba. She raised her head and looked at the colorful and magnificent beam of light that pierced through the sky from Chindu Peak. For a moment, her eyes were a little dazed. In Chris's heart, a hesitant voice kept recalling, "Is this what you want to pursue? Is this the power you want to pursue? What can it bring you? How much are you going to pay for it? Everything?" Just as Chris was staring at the colorful beam of light in a daze, Ding Nan, who was hiding in the night, suddenly felt a powerful aura pounce on her in the blink of an eye. She was shocked and subconsciously wanted to fight back, but she heard a familiar voice scolding her, "How dare you? Don't you recognize me?" Ding Nan turned her head and saw Jing Yuan standing beside her, looking in the direction of Tiandu Peak with sparkling eyes. Ding Nan immediately withdrew her hand. She smiled embarrassedly and let go of Alba's throat. She asked, "Master, where are Ziyuan and the others?" Jing Yuan's face darkened and he said in a cold voice, "Those two bitches are playing guerrilla warfare with me. I don't care about them. I don't think they dare to get close." As he said this, he glanced at Alba, who had already been paralyzed with fear, and asked coldly, "Who is she?" Ding Nan snorted and said, "An exchange student at Tiannan University. She can also be considered Li Yundong's classmate." "Classmate?" Jing Yuan narrowed his eyes and smiled sinisterly. "Well, take her as a hostage." Ding Nan hesitated for a moment before saying, "But master, she doesn't seem to have anything to do with Li Yundong." Jing Yuan's mind was not on this at this time. He said impatiently, "Who told you to get a few valuable hostages? It's better to have someone in your hands than nothing. Besides, even if there are no hostages, I have the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade in my hand. Do you think I won't be able to get the Diyuan Jindan?" Hearing Jing Yuan's unkind tone, Ding Nan sneered in her heart. "This old man can't catch Ziyuan and Su Chan, so he's taking it out on me?" Although Ding Nan thought this in her heart, she changed the topic. "Master, what's going on with the colorful beam of light just now?" Jing Yuan's eyes shone brightly as he looked at Tiandu Peak. There was uncontrollable enthusiasm and excitement in his voice as he said, the Diyuan Jindan has appeared." Ding Nan was shocked. "So fast?" Jing Yuan stared straight at the colorful beam of light and said, "Do you think it will take dozens of days?" Come on, let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, countless cyan lights flashed in the sky, as if countless cultivators had appeared in the blink of an eye and were madly rushing toward Tiandu Peak. Jing Yuan laughed and said, "They're coming, they're all coming. My good disciple, we can't fall behind. Let's go." As he said this, he took Ding Nan's hand and Ding Nan grabbed Alba. The three of them disappeared in a flash. After Su Chan and Ziyuan saw that Jing Yuan had left, they dared to show up and approach Zhou Qin. As soon as Zhou Qin saw the two of them, she was shocked and asked, "Are you all right? What was that light just now?" Ziyuan said with a stern expression, "The Diyuan Jindan has appeared. I didn't expect it to be so fast." Su Chan saw cyan lights flashing around her and cultivators flying toward Tiandu Peak one after another. She said anxiously, "Let's go. What are you waiting for?" Zhou Qin pointed to Chris, who was trapped on the boulder, and said, "What about her? Are we going to take her with us?" Ziyuan immediately frowned and said, "No, there will be a fierce battle on Tiandu Peak later. It will be extremely tragic. It will be a disaster rather than a blessing to take someone like her who has no ability to protect herself with us. It's better to let her stay on the ropeway first. At least it's safe here. We'll come back to find her later, okay?" Zhou Qin thought for a moment, then quickly flashed in front of Chris and hugged her. Then she jumped onto the ropeway that had not been cut off by Ding Nan and said, "Chris, we're going to Tiandu Peak to help Li Yundong. Don't move around here. We'll come back to find you later. Okay?" At this time, Chris seemed to be stunned. She stared at Zhou Qin without saying a word. Zhou Qin was burning with anxiety at this time. Seeing that Chris didn't speak, she thought that she had agreed, so with the help of Su Chan and Ziyuan, they flew together. At this time, Chris saw the three of them fly away. The ropeway of Mount Huangshan, which had been full of murderous intent just a moment ago, had become extremely quiet. The night wind blew and the cliff was dense. The air around the ropeway was cold and there was a penetrating chill in the air. Chris stared at the colorful beam of light in the direction of Tiandu Peak. Suddenly, what Hardedef had said to her kept echoing in her mind. "Chris, if you have the chance, you must tell me what kind of feeling cultivation is." These words kept echoing in Chris's mind, and her eyes gradually bloomed with a stubborn and persistent gaze. Suddenly, Chris fiercely jumped up and madly ran in the direction of Sky Capital Peak. Chapter 572. The alchemy room chosen by Wang Jinyuan could be said to be one of the three best places in the Fengshui treasure land. It was filled with treasures and the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. The huge grotto was surrounded by formations and runes to prevent people from breaking in through the yin spirit or yang spirit. In the center of the stone room was a huge yin-yang 8 trigrams formation. The center of the formation was hollowed out, and below it was a huge abyss, which was the medicine pool. "Let's go." 7 km. Flames were boiling in the medicine pool, and above the flames was a three-legged copper tripod. It was the magical item of Sun Simiao, the famous medicine king of the Tang dynasty, the Medicine King tripod. The top of the Medicine King tripod was facing a hollowed-out cave skylight, which reflected the meaning of illuminating the 9 heavens and guiding the 9 earths. The Medicine King tripod was about half a meter in diameter, black all over, and engraved with ancient characters and totems. Underneath the Medicine King tripod, various kinds of faint mist constantly drifted up from the medicine pool at the bottom of the Medicine King tripod, then drilled into the bottom of the Medicine King tripod, and slowly gathered in the furnace of the Medicine King tripod. These various kinds of mist rolled and twisted in it, colorful like colorful beads shining in all directions. Wang Jinyuan saw the right time and threw the 1,000-year-old snow lotus in his hand into the medicine pool. Then he quickly pinched a few fingers, shouted, and pointed at the medicine pool. Suddenly there was a rumbling sound in the medicine pool, and a towering flame burst into the sky. The Medicine King tripod was roasted by this raging fire. Suddenly, a cyan and white color converged in the 6-colored brilliance, turning into a 7-colored brilliance. This brilliance lingered and twisted, constantly changing shape. After an unknown amount of time, the roars of dragons and tigers suddenly burst forth from the medicinal pool, causing the entire sky capital peak to tremble. The 7-colored brilliance that was originally only shining brightly in the stone chamber soared into the sky, transforming into an intense pillar of light. Following the appearance of this pillar of light, the stone chamber was immediately filled with a strange medicinal fragrance. It was exceptionally beautiful, causing one's mind to be intoxicated. Li Yunyang saw the beam of light rush up along the skylight at the top of the grotto, as if it could penetrate the 9th heaven. He was shocked and asked, "What's going on?" Wang Jinyuan said with a fanatical look in his eyes, "It's done. The Diuanjindan has been refined." Li Yundong hadn't expected that the refining of the Diuanjindan would be so fast and that the movement would be so big. He asked in surprise, "So fast?" Wang Jinyuan laughed ecstatically and said, "Of course, I've been collecting medicinal materials for more than 10 years for this day. Everything was already prepared, and all that was left was the east wind. As long as I get the 1,000-year-old snow lotus, I can immediately refine the Diuanjindan." Li Yunyang widened his eyes and looked at the colorful pillar of light. He saw 4 thumb-sized colorful pills floating in the air gradually appear in the colorful pillar of light. These 3 pills were crystal clear and emitted waves of gentle 7-colored light, illuminating the stone chamber with bursts of colorful light. Wang Jinyuan was even more ecstatic and said, "4 pills in 1 furnace, ha! Master, did you see that? I refined the legendary 4 pills in 1 cauldron. Even the Medicine King Sun Simiao only managed to concoct 5 pills a batch." As soon as he finished speaking, a figure suddenly rushed in from the round hole of the skylight on the top of the alchemy room, which was less than the size of a football. At first, the figure was extremely long like a rolling pin, but soon after it got into the stone room, it immediately swelled up and quickly turned into a masked man in black. The man in black appeared in the blink of an eye and stretched out his hand to grab the 4 Diuanjindan floating in the air. Li Yundong and Wang Jinyuan hadn't expected that someone would come in from this place. They were shocked and shouted in unison, "Stop! You're courting death." Li Yundong's mind stirred. Before his body moved at all, a bolt of lightning pounced on the man in black in the blink of an eye. The Liuha sword made a lightning strike. The man in black dared to snatch food from the tiger's mouth at this time. Obviously, his cultivation was also extremely high. Without looking at it, he stretched out his hand and firmly clamped the Liuha sword with 2 fingers. However, the Liuha sword was a psychic magical weapon. As soon as it was clamped, it began to struggle violently, like a monster trapped in a cage. The man in black was clamping the Liuha sword with 1 hand and grabbing the Diuanjindan with the other. But at this time, Wang Jinyuan's powerful magical weapon, Chu Qi, also flew out in an instant and attacked the man in black. Seeing that the Chu Qi was about to hit his chest in the blink of an eye, the black-clothed man gritted his teeth and still used his hand to grab the Diuanjindan. With a snap, his 5 fingers firmly grabbed the 4 Diuanjindan into his palm. As soon as the man in black grabbed the Diuanjindan, the colorful brilliance in the stone room disappeared in an instant, and the originally dazzling stone room became abnormally dim. Although the man in black had seized the Diuanjindan in an instant, he was greedy and used his physical body to block the magical weapon. Suddenly, Wang Jinyuan's Chu Qi hit his chest with a puff. The man in black suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and his yang spirit body was blasted out of his body. Once a person's soul was lost, his body would be ownerless. Not to mention activating his Jinqi and spiritual energy, he couldn't even exert his strength like an ordinary person. The Liuha sword, which had been clamped by him, suddenly became like a tiger out of its cage. With a spin of the blade, the man's fingers were instantly broken. Then with a flash of lightning, the man's arm, which was holding the Diuan Jindan, was cut off at the wrist. The Liuha sword was merciless. Soon, it flashed again and pierced through the man's heart. As soon as the man in black's broken wrist fell, his fingers involuntarily loosened. The Diuan Jindan saw the light of day again and was still floating in the air. The stone room was once again filled with colorful brilliance. The man in black's body was instantly crippled. His young spirit roared angrily and was about to pounce on the Diuan Jindan again when he suddenly heard a rumbling mantra reciting in his ears, Fu Ri Luo Jianan. Bah. In an instant, a shining golden Vajra realm freedom seal hit his young spirit firmly. The man in black didn't even have time to groan. In the blink of an eye, his young spirit was smashed into pieces and turned into countless thin cyan rays of light. These rays of light didn't dare to stay any longer and quickly flew toward the skylight exit of the alchemy room. Wang Jinyuan grinned grimly. You can come and go as you please? He spat out a stream of purple qi from his nostrils and quickly pinched the incantation with both hands to point at the medicine pool. Suddenly, a colorful flame boiled in the medicine pool and rushed toward the rays of light. At the same time, Li Yundong took out the burning thumb pot and flicked his finger. With a ding, ripples spread out from the burning thumb pot, pulling back the escaping young spirit clones one by one. Li Yundong and Wang Jinyuan attacked together. The poor young spirit master had nowhere to run. In the blink of an eye, he was either swallowed up by the flames in the medicine pool or absorbed most of his spiritual qi and jinqi by Li Yundong's burning thumb pot. His body and soul were completely destroyed. Although Li Yundong and Wang Jinyuan had killed the cultivator who had dared to steal the treasure in front of them, they didn't feel happy about fighting side by side. Instead, they looked at each other with vigilance and hostility. Wang Jinyuan said angrily, Jinrenli, it's not like I won't give you the Diuan Jindan. Why do you have to do this? Li Yundong also said angrily, why are you blaming me? Didn't you say that this place is very safe and hidden? Why would someone suddenly try to steal the elixir? Wang Jinyuan saw that Li Yundong was full of indignation and didn't seem to be lying. He couldn't help but be stunned and said in a deep voice, Jinrenli, if I wanted to play tricks, would I have used such a low-level method? Li Yundong stared at Wang Jinyuan like lightning. After a while he said slowly, didn't you leak the news? Wang Jinyuan laughed angrily and said, I suspected that you were the one who leaked the news. I've been working hard for more than 10 years for this day. Do you think I'm stupid and deliberately let someone steal my Diuan Jindan? Li Yundong frowned. Then what's going on? As soon as Wang Jinyuan opened his mouth and was about to speak, he suddenly saw another person fly in from the skylight. Li Yundong and Wang Jinyuan were furious at the same time, and their powerful magical weapons immediately rushed toward this person. This man's cultivation was obviously not as high as that of the previous black-clothed man. In the blink of an eye, he was killed by their powerful magical weapons and fell to the ground without saying a word. His young spirit was also quickly strangled by Li Yunyang and Wang Jinyuan. After Li Yundong destroyed the man's young spirit, his expression changed and he said, it might be a coincidence if it's one, but what about two? As soon as he finished speaking, he saw another figure looking out of the skylight and disappearing in a flash. Li Yundong was furious. With a thought in his mind, the Liuha sword swept out like lightning and stabbed toward the man with a puff. The man who was looking out of the skylight had no time to dodge. With a scream he fell down. His painful cry was clearly heard from outside the alchemy room. It's inside. The Diuan Jindan is inside. As soon as this person finished shouting, the alchemy room immediately rumbled, as if countless Dharma spells and Dharma treasures were fiercely bombarding it. Li Yundong felt as if the stone room he was in had been hit by a terrible bombardment. Countless cannonballs poured down, shaking heaven and earth, causing the gravel and dust in the stone room to fall continuously. Wang Jinyuan's face was livid. He gritted his teeth and said, what the hell is going on? Why are there so many people? Zhong Qingsong, do you dare to betray me? Li Yundong's face was as dark as water. He quickly looked around as if he wanted to see how long the stone room could last under the bombardment of magical items and magic. Wang Jinyuan noticed Li Yundong's actions. He snorted coldly and said proudly, Jinrenli, there's no need to look. They won't be able to break in. I've set up more than a dozen magic formations here. Unless a lightning retribution master attacks, they won't be able to break in for a while. As he spoke, Wang Jinyuan raised his head coldly and looked at the skylight. He said coldly, "When I came in, I had already sealed the entrance. If they want to come in, they can only come from here." Li Yundong snorted. "One man can hold the pass against 10,000 enemies. If one comes, I'll kill one. If two come, I'll kill both." Wang Jinyuan sneered and said, "That's true, but how many can we kill? What if they just surround us? Are we going to stay here forever? Besides, there is no fortress in the world that can't be broken." Li Yundong's face darkened. "Then what do you think we should do?" Wang Jinyuan looked at Li Yundong, then suddenly smiled and said, "Jinrenli, I have an idea." Li Yundong asked, "What is it?" Wang Jinyuan smiled slightly and said, "That is, the cicada takes off its shell." As he spoke, he suddenly waved the horsetail whisk in his hand, and the tail of the whisk wrapped around a Diuan Jindan floating in the air. Then he quickly turned into a green light and fled toward the skylight. As soon as Wang Jinyuan escaped, Li Yundong immediately went out of his body with his yang spirit and followed him out of the skylight. As soon as Wang Jinyuan escaped into the air, he gritted his teeth and shouted at Li Yundong with deep hatred, "Li Yundong, there are still 3 Diuan Jindans down there. Don't you think it's enough? Why won't you let me go?" After that, he instantly turned into a green light and fled to the horizon. Li Yundong was shocked and angry. He knew that Wang Jinyuan was trying to get rid of him, but he couldn't chase after Wang Jinyuan, because there were indeed 3 Diuan Jindans in the alchemy room under his feet. If he chased after him, he would really lose everything. Even the colorful brilliance of the Diuan Jindans was still shining brightly. Other cultivators who had come to rob the panaceas would not believe it. "Wang Jinyuan is good. How bold." There were 4 Diuan Jindans, but she only took 1. Li Yundong's heart was filled with rage and shock. If Wang Jinyuan had taken the Diuan Jindans as well, he would have chased him to the ends of the earth, even if it meant risking his life. If he had taken 3, the brilliance in the stone room would have been greatly reduced, and the other cultivators would naturally chase after the person who had more panaceas. But Wang Jinyuan had only taken 1. He didn't even take 2. It was as if he was afraid that his plan to lead the trouble to Li Yundong would fail, that he could not escape, and that Li Yundong would not be attacked by everyone. "This man is ruthless. He is an enemy, not a friend. I can't let him go." Li Yundong was extremely angry. Just as he was about to flick the burning thumb pot, countless powerful magical weapons flew over from all directions in the night. These magical weapons of various colors were like stormy waves, forming a huge torrent, smashing toward him. He hadn't slept well last night, so he had a splitting headache. He would make up for it tomorrow morning. Chapter 573. Li Yunyang looked around quickly and saw that most of the cultivators around were hiding in the night. They didn't show their figures, but attacked from a distance with their powerful magical weapons. Obviously, they didn't want to reveal their true identities in case they really grabbed the Diuan Jindan and attracted the attention of others. Watch net. 7 KOM. In the blink of an eye, the Tiandu peak of Mount Huangshan was boiling under the night sky. For a time, all kinds of powerful magical weapons were falling like stars in the sky. Even though Li Yunyang was strong, he couldn't stop so many powerful magical weapons from smashing toward him. With a thought, he retracted his yang spirit and let the powerful magical weapons around him hit nothing. Suddenly he heard a familiar voice shouting outside, "Yundong, be careful." Li Yundong was shocked. "Chaner? Why is she here? Nonsense, truly nonsense." Soon Suchan screamed, "Ouch! Don't hit me." Her voice faded into the distance in an instant, as if she had fled far away in an instant. Some cultivators shouted, "Catch them. Let's see if Li Yundong will hand over the Diuan Jindan." Li Yunyang was furious. Immediately, his yang spirit came out of his body again and turned into the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King with 3 heads and 6 arms. He made a Mahamudra in the direction of the voice. With a bang, the cultivator who said he wanted to catch Suchan suddenly screamed and stopped moving. At this time, Zhou Qin quickly jumped to the top of the alchemy room and stood next to Li Yundong's yang spirit. She asked nervously, "Master, are you okay?" Li Yundong glared at her angrily. "Why are you here? Didn't I tell you to stay at home?" Zhou Qin was stunned when she heard this. Just as she was about to speak, Ziyuan also flew to their side and said quickly, "Don't pursue this matter at this time. It's my fault. Hurry up and think of a way to deal with the matter at hand." While the 3 of them were talking, many cultivators around them controlled their magic treasures and magic to attack Li Yundong. At this time, Li Yundong no longer dodged. He held the reincarnation 9 seals in his hand and kept waving his 6 arms like a 1,000-armed Buddha. In an instant he made countless big handprints in front of him, blocking the attacks of the powerful magical weapons and magic spells around him one after another. A cultivator hiding in the darkness shouted, "Li Yundong, hurry up and hand over the Diuanjin Dan. Otherwise, with so many of us here, we will exhaust you to death." Li Yundong snorted angrily. "You want to bully me with numbers? Alright, bring it on." After saying that, he sent another palm strike towards the person who spoke. But it was obvious that this person had learned from the previous mistake. After saying that, he immediately changed his position. After Li Yunyang's golden Mahamudra shot out, it was like a stone sinking into the sea without any reaction. But very quickly, the magical weapons and spells from the surroundings once again attacked like a stormy sea. In the dark night, the wind blew violently, fireballs danced in the air, and the flying swords of various sects were like lightning running amok. For a moment, all kinds of strange lights shone brightly on Sky Capital Peak, brightly illuminating the surroundings. Facing the siege of everyone, Li Yundong did not panic. He pinched the Mahamudra with 2 hands, and the other 4 quickly pinched the reincarnation 9 seals to resist the tide-like attack. After he finished reciting the mantra, he shouted loudly, and an immovable Vajra Samadhi Mahamudra, which could not be moved by the wind, suddenly appeared in front of him. With a bang, a Vajra Arhat suddenly appeared around him. These Vajra Arhats were all shining with golden light. They were either sitting cross-legged or standing with their palms together. They were chanting Sanskrit scriptures, like a golden city wall, firmly wrapping Li Yundong and the others in it. The surrounding magical weapons and powerful magical weapons hit it, creating waves of golden ripples, but they were unable to break through the golden city wall. From a distance, one could see that all kinds of meteors on Chindu Peak were rushing toward a golden ball of light. For a moment, the sky and earth were shaking and rumbling sounds were heard. Zhou Qin's eyes widened as she looked at the scene in front of her. She asked in surprise, "Master, what kind of magic is this?" Ziyuan was experienced and knowledgeable. She quickly said, "Is this the Mahamudra? It's impossible. How could it be so powerful?" Li Yundong said in a deep voice, "This is the real mantra Mahamudra. Now is not the time to talk about this. Hurry up and leave with the Diuanjin Dan. I'll hold them off." Ziyuan immediately rejected him and said flatly, "No. As soon as we leave with the Diuanjin Dan, they will immediately turn around and chase after us. Didn't you see that none of these cultivators dared to reveal their identities? How do you know which cultivators are still hiding in the dark and haven't made a move?" Li Yundong gritted his teeth and said, "Then what should we do?" Ziyuan thought for a moment and said, "How many Diuanjindans are left?" As Li Yundong performed the Mahamudra, he said, "Wan Jinyuan refined 4 elixirs in 1 furnace. He took 1 for himself, so there are still 3 left." Ziyuan was shocked. 4 elixirs in 1 furnace? Wan Jinyuan is amazing. Li Yundong gritted his teeth and said, "He's more than amazing. He simply won't stop until I'm dead. He threw 3 Diuanjindans to me. Humph, how generous." Zhou Qin said angrily, "This guy is sinister and vicious. Isn't he harming others by throwing this hot potato to you at this time? Master, what should we do? Should we throw this hot potato to someone else?" Ziyuan was shocked and immediately said, "No." Li Yundong also laughed angrily and said, "What are you talking about? Since he dares to throw it away, I dare to take it. I'd like to see who can snatch this Diuanjin Dan from me." Zhou Qin said nervously, "But master, the enemy is in the dark while we are out in the open. We can't advance or retreat and we don't know how many enemies there are. What should we do?" As she spoke, the magic weapons around her bombarded the golden walls made of Vajra Arhats one after another like a storm. It seemed that the attacks would never stop. The Vajra Arhats, which were originally shining with golden light, slowly dimmed, and some places were even shattered by the bombardment. Some cultivators were overjoyed and shouted, "He can't hold on any longer. Let's work harder." Li Yundong gritted his teeth and shouted loudly. After making the fixed fundamental seal, he quickly made another Akuo seal with his hands and said, "Ah! Ji Sui Fu Luo Luo Shi." This roar suddenly shook the sky. In an instant, a shining golden Buddha appeared above Li Yundong's head. This Buddha was sitting on the flame lotus throne, with 7 colorful halos around his back. He crossed his hands and his 2 thumbs were stretched out vertically. The middle section of his 2 index fingers was straight, and he used his 2 index fingers to support his thumbs. In the palm of his hand, a soft light kept gushing out. As soon as the Vajra arhats around him came into contact with this light, they immediately shone with golden light again. For a moment, the shaky golden city wall immediately became as solid as gold, and it was even more stable than before. For a moment, the chanting of these Vajra arhats was loud, as if thousands of Buddhas were paying homage. The chanting sound lingered on Tiandu Peak, even louder than the sound of magic and the explosion of magic weapons. After Li Yundong stabilized his position with one move, he looked at the powerful magical weapons that were constantly attacking him and said with an angry smile, "Do you think I don't have any powerful magical weapons?" Lioha. As soon as he finished speaking, the Lioha flashed behind him and flew into the air. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a speck of starlight. But after a while, this speck of starlight turned into 2, 3 and countless specks of starlight. When they fell again, it was an overwhelming sword rain. The Lioha instantly split into countless sharp swords in the air, attacking the cultivators hiding in the darkness around him. At that time, Yen Feng had relied on the Lioha to fight against many people alone. On Mount Gazao, she had beaten everyone until they had no way to fight back. At this time, in the hands of Li Yundong, whose cultivation was higher, the power of the Lioha was even greater. When the surrounding cultivators saw the Lioha coming at them, they were all shocked. None of them had expected that Li Yundong would be able to fight back in the face of the siege of so many people alone. For a moment, everyone was caught off guard and was beaten to a pulp. Ding Nan was dumbfounded. She stammered, "Master, what kind of magic is this? Li Yundong is too powerful, isn't he?" Zheng Yuan's eyes shone brightly. He looked at Li Yundong with great vigilance and said, "This is the mantra Mahamudra Sakuta Mudra. Don't you think the handprint of this Amateus Buddha looks like a lotus? The power of this handprint lies in its ability to increase the mighty Buddha nature. Damn it, this guy has become stronger again. If he really gets these 3 Diyuan Jindans, humph, coupled with the Lioha in his hand, he will really be able to do whatever he wants in the cultivation world. No, we must stop him." Ding Nan's eyes were still fixed on the majestic Li Yunyang. She subconsciously asked, "How can we stop him?" Zheng Yuan's eyes flickered. He glanced at Alba and suddenly laughed grimly. He said to Ding Nan, "Go, take her out and exchange her for a Diyuan Jindan. Let's see how Li Yundong will react." Ding Nan was shocked. "Me? Here. Nonsense, are you deaf?" Zheng Yuan stared at Li Yundong, as if he wanted to find his flaws from his every movement and expression. However, although Li Yundong was being besieged at this time, he was relying on his powerful Jinchi and powerful mantra Mahamudra Kung Fu to fight against many people without falling into a disadvantageous position. Ding Nan was not a fool. She naturally knew that if anyone stood up at this time, they would definitely become the target of Li Yundong's hatred. Even if Li Yundong gave in and she got the Diyuan Jindan, she would immediately become another target of the cultivators in the world. This was definitely a job that required a knife to cut one's head out and a knife to cut one's head in. Ding Nan cursed in her heart, but she said with a pleading face, "Master, it's not good now, is it? What if?" But before she could finish speaking, Zheng Yuan suddenly turned his head and stared at her with a terrifying and gloomy look. He said coldly, "Do you want to die? Didn't you hear what I said?" Ding Nan was frightened by Zheng Yuan's expression at this time. She suddenly realized that in the face of the great temptation of the Diyuan Jindan, Zheng Yuan could no longer maintain his hypocrisy and calmness. At this time, this cold, cruel, ruthless and ferocious Zheng Yuan was his true face. Ding Nan's heart was cold. She suppressed the raging anger and shock in her heart, forced a smile at Zheng Yuan, and then dragged Alba to the field. Ding Nan stood under the door of the immortal cave and looked up at Li Yundong, who was majestic in the alchemy room. She looked at Zhou Qin, who was close to Li Yundong, and cried in her heart, "Why me? Why is it always me? Why is she always able to stand on top of me in all her glory? Why is this happening?" Zheng Yuan saw Ding Nan standing not far away and looking at Li Yundong in a daze. He lowered his voice impatiently and roared at Ding Nan, "Why are you in a daze?" Ding Nan's body trembled. She gritted her teeth, raised her head, and shouted at Li Yundong, "Li Yundong, stop right now. Otherwise I'll kill her." Chapter 574. Li Yundong looked down and saw a familiar figure standing below. She was dressed in fashionable and sexy clothes, which was incompatible with the situation in front of him. As soon as Li Yundong saw this person's appearance, he was shocked. Ding Nan? Why are you here? Have you reached the Zhuji phase? But soon, Li Yundong saw a woman with brown and blue eyes in Ding Nan's hand. It was Alba, who had been clamoring with Chris and the others to worship him as her master. Li Yundong was shocked again. How could she be here? Ding Nan, are you crazy? Let her go. Ding Nan was trembling all over. What she was most afraid of was being hated by Li Yundong, and what she was most afraid of being looked down upon by him. However, in front of her, Li Yundong's shocked and angry eyes were like sharp knives, cutting her heart one by one. Go to the internet. Ding Nan gritted her teeth and said in a trembling voice, Li Yundong, if you don't want her to die, hand over the Diunjin Dan. Li Yundong seemed to be unable to believe his eyes. He said in shock, Ding Nan. Have you been with Zheng Yuan for too long that you've lost your humanity? How could you take an innocent person as a hostage? Are you still the Ding Nan I know? Ding Nan suddenly felt as if a sharp knife had pierced her chest, and her whole body trembled uncontrollably. She giggled while crying and said, Yes, I'm no longer the Ding Nan you know. Hurry up and make a choice. Whether this person lives or dies is up to you. Although Alba didn't understand Chinese, she was not a fool. Seeing this situation, she could guess what was going on. She shouted at Li Yundong in English in horror, Help, master, help me. Alba was also a rare beauty. She was tall and sexy and had a strong South American style. At this time, her pleading really softened the hearts of those who heard it. Many cultivators turned their faces away and couldn't bear to look at her anymore. There was a hint of sympathy in Li Yundong's eyes. He shook his head secretly and said to Ding Nan in a cold voice, Ding Nan, you have already fallen into the devil's path. Moreover, if this Diunjin Dan is given to you, it will definitely fall into Zheng Yuan's hands. Zheng Yuan could be said to be a man with a human face but a beast's heart. If the Diunjin Dan fell into his hands, more innocent people would definitely die. As the saying goes, doing good breeds great evil. In order to save Alba, I let more innocent people die in the hands of Zheng Yuan. This is not a good deed, but an accomplice to a villain, a great evil in the world. Li Yundong's eyes gradually turned cold and he said in a cold voice, But I want to tell you, if you dare to kill her from now on, you will no longer be my friend, my classmate, but my enemy. When I see you again, I will no longer be lenient and will definitely enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. Anyone who dares to harm the people around me, I will definitely chase them to the ends of the earth. No matter how vast the sky is, there is no place for them to hide. No matter how vast the earth is, there is no place for them to hide. Li Yundong's words were resolute and murderous, which made people's hair stand on end. For a moment, Chindu Peak was quiet. Some people looked at Ding Nan and Li Yundong quietly, watching the changes in the situation on the field. Some people were shocked by Li Yundong's words and even began to retreat. Ding Nan was no exception. She was shocked by Li Yundong's amazing momentum. She subconsciously took a step back and loosened her grip on Alba's throat a little. As soon as Ding Nan loosened her grip, Alba immediately noticed it and began to struggle frantically. Ding Nan was absent-minded and accidentally let Alba escape. She ran 2 steps forward. Zheng Yuan, who was hiding in the dark, saw that Ding Nan had no reaction. He was furious and waved the horsetail whisk in his hand. Suddenly, the whisk lashed out like a whip and grabbed Alba back. Only then did Ding Nan react. She quickly rushed back to Zheng Yuan's side, forced a smile and said, Master, Li Yundong doesn't fall for this. What should we do? Zheng Yuan grinned hideously and said, Then kill her. It's good to disturb Li Yundong's Taoist heart. After saying that, Zheng Yuan raised his hand and was about to slap the top of Alba's head. Alba suddenly let out a horrified scream. Ding Nan trembled all over. She quickly stopped Zheng Yuan and said, Master, don't. Zheng Yuan turned his face with cold eyes and looked at Ding Nan suspiciously. He said word by word in a cold voice, Are you the Pinger I know? Ding Nan's heart tightened. She forced a smile and said, Master, what are you talking about? If I'm not Pinger, who am I? Zheng Yuan's eyes were like lightning as he stared at Ding Nan's face, as if he wanted to see through her heart at a glance. The Pinger I know is not such a wishy-washy person. It's not a big deal to kill such a nobody, let alone a foreigner. Humph, how dare you speak up for her? Ding Nan broke out in a cold sweat. She thought quickly and said, Master, you have always taught me to think about the way out before entering the city gate. What if Li Yundong refuses to let us go after we snatch the Diunjin Dan? Or, if we don't get it and fall into an extremely disadvantageous situation, Li Yundong will come to make trouble for us again. At that time, having a shield is better than not having one, right? Zheng Yuan stared at Ding Nan for a long time until she almost couldn't stand still. Then he snorted, withdrew his palm and said coldly, "Then I'll let this foreigner live a little longer." After that, he stood with his hands behind his back and looked at Li Yundong gloomily. He said in a low voice, "This guy is relying on his high cultivation to guard this place. It's really tricky. This alchemy room has been attacked for a long time, but it hasn't been taken down for a long time. If the noise is really too big and attracts the attention of the world, what should we do?" While he was talking, Li Yundong was also secretly worried above the alchemy room. Although he had shocked Ding Nan with an extremely tough attitude just now, and for a moment, all the cultivators around had stopped attacking together, Tiandu Peak fell into a very short silence. Li Yundong looked around and saw that in the thick night, he could vaguely see a few figures flashing, and more people were hiding in the shadows, as if they were waiting for the best opportunity to give Li Yundong a stronger blow. However, he, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin were standing above the alchemy room, shrouded in colorful light. They were so clear that they were like stars under the ceiling lights on a stage showing every detail. This kind of feeling really made Li Yundong extremely unhappy. Zhou Qin saw Li Yundong frown and thought that he was worried that Alba would be taken hostage. She secretly regretted it. If she hadn't been willful, such a tragedy wouldn't have happened. She was sad, so she said in a low voice, "Master, I want to apologize to you." Li Yundong was stunned. "What's wrong?" Zhou Qin hesitated for a moment. She bit her lip and was about to speak softly, but Li Yundong raised his hand and stopped her. Li Yundong said, "If you have anything to say, go back and think about how to get out of this damn place first. Now we have been set up by that bastard Wang Jinyuan, and we can't stop halfway." Ziyuan smiled bitterly and said, "3 Duan Jindans. He's really willing to spend a lot of money? I don't even dare to think about it. It's the first time I've heard of such a big hot potato. My heart is scalded to death." Li Yundong snorted coldly and said, "If you take something in advance, you must give it in advance. 1 Duan Jindan is enough for a cultivator to break through the bottleneck. Why does he need so many? Unless he wants to mass-produce golden immortal masters." Seeing that Li Yundong didn't care about her mistakes for the time being, Zhou Qin felt a little relieved. She smiled and comforted him, "Master, let's take these 3 Duan Jindans now and let these guys stare at us." Li Yundong smiled and said, "There are 4 of us and there are 3 Duan Jindans here. How should we divide them?" Zhou Qin was stunned, but she quickly said, "Of course, Master Ziyuan, and Su Chan will eat them." Li Yundong was stunned. "What about you? You don't want them?" Zhou Qin smiled and shook her head. "I just took the Renyuan Jindan. How can I take the Diyuan Jindan again? No matter how lucky a person is, how can he take 2 elixirs in a row? Aren't you afraid of shortening your lifespan?" Li Yundong took a deep look at Zhou Qin and nodded in his heart. He changed the topic and suddenly asked, "By the way, where's Chaner? I heard her voice just now. Where is she now?" Ziyuan smiled bitterly and said, "Just now, Su Chan's words alarmed the other cultivators. As a result, the other party's powerful magical weapon came. In a panic, she immediately fled without a trace. At this time, I don't know where she is." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his head and said, "This girl. Forget it. Although Chaner's spiritual power is not strong, her self-protection skills are quite good. She must have gotten rid of the other party and hid in the shadows like these cultivators, waiting for an opportunity to help me. Otherwise, if the other party had really caught Su Chan, I'm afraid they would have used her to threaten me by now." Ziyuan nodded in agreement. She looked around and said in a low voice, "But, if it goes on like this, I'm afraid." Li Yundong immediately said decisively, delay as long as you can. It's best to delay until dawn. I believe that these guys know their sex and identities, and they all want to take the Diyuan Jindan for themselves. Once dawn comes, humph, let's see how they can hide." As soon as Li Yundong's voice fell, a hoarse voice came from the night. "Jinrenli, you have a good appetite. Do you want to take 3 Diyuan Jindan for yourself?" Li Yundong smiled coldly. "Who are you? Do you dare to tell me your sect and name?" Soon, the man stopped talking, but another middle-aged man's voice sounded in the night. "Jinrenli, do you really think you can swallow 3 Diyuan Jindan by yourself? Aren't you afraid of holding back?" Soon, another voice said indignantly, "That's right, you greedy boy. Aren't you afraid of being punished by heaven for being too greedy?" Li Yundong laughed and said, The reason why Wang Jinyuan was able to refine the Diyuan Jindan was that I brought him the 1,000-year-old snow lotus. Since he only wants one Diyuan Jindan, the remaining 3 naturally belong to me. They should be my own. What right do you have to snatch them? For a moment, everyone was stunned and speechless. Some of them were unconvinced, so they straightened their necks and said, "Of course, this kind of elixir belongs to those who see it. Those who have the ability should have it. How can you, a kid, occupy 3 Diyuan Jindan by yourself?" Zheng Yuan also didn't want to be left out. He stood up and said loudly, "Jinrenli, why don't you take out 2 and let us all share them? It's better than hurting our friendship. What do you think?" As soon as Li Yundong saw Zheng Yuan, he immediately gritted his teeth and said, "Zheng Yuan, how dare you say such a thing? Let me tell you, I would rather feed the Diyuan Jindan to a dog than give it to you." Zheng Yuan's face changed dramatically, and his expression suddenly became extremely ferocious. "Then don't blame me. Li Yundong, don't regret it." Li Yundong laughed wildly and said, "If you have the ability, come at me." Although Zheng Yuan had the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade in his hand, Li Yundong's Shintong just now had really made him very afraid, and his original desire to win had been greatly dispelled. He thought to himself, "It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. This bastard is arrogant now. When I get the Diyuan Jindan and raise the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade to become stronger, I will definitely torture you until you don't even look like a human or a ghost." As Zheng Yuan viciously cursed Li Yundong in his heart, he slowly retreated and hid his figure in the night. For a moment, Chindu Peak became quiet again. Everyone seemed to be afraid of something, and they didn't even whisper to each other. The atmosphere was abnormally quiet. Li Yundong felt strange in his heart. He frowned slightly and said, "Do they also want to delay? No way?" Ziyuan tilted her head slightly and said curiously, "There seems to be a strange sound." Li Yundong immediately asked, "What sound?" Ziyuan frowned and said, "Listen, there seems to be a rustling sound." Li Yundong listened and was slightly stunned. "It seems that there is indeed. Where is the sound coming from?" Zhou Qin also listened carefully. She hesitated for a moment and suddenly said, "It seems to be coming from under our feet." As soon as she finished speaking, the colorful light in the alchemy room under their feet disappeared in an instant. Li Yundong suddenly looked down and saw a figure flash in the alchemy room, grabbing the remaining 3 Diyuan Jindans with one hand, and then quickly diving into the medicine pool. Li Yundong suddenly became furious. "How dare you make trouble under the feet of Tai Sui? You're courting death." After that, he instantly turned into a green light and chased after the figure. "I still owe everyone a new update. I really can't make it up today. What a pity." Chapter 575. Li Yundong knew that Wang Jinyuan's alchemy room had a large number of strong magic arrays, which could resist the siege of foreign magic and magical weapons for a long time. However, because alchemy needed to draw in the earth qi and go straight to the 9th heaven, this alchemy room was connected to the 9th heaven, but it was the least guarded place. To watch the net. Those who had been able to get in through the skylight must have been top masters of Yang spirit, and those who had been able to get in through the pool must have been masters of earth magic. In the cultivation world, only the Jinshan sect was proficient in earth escape magic. Therefore, as soon as Li Yundong entered the alchemy room, he shouted tentatively, "Thief of the Jinshan sect, where are you going?" Sure enough, the person who had stolen the Diyuan Jindan trembled violently, and his escaping figure slowed down a little. In the blink of an eye, Li Yundong caught up with him. Li Yundong sneered and slapped the man's back with his palm. However, this person clearly felt a strong and fierce palm wind coming from behind him, as if someone was waving a large iron hammer and smashing towards his back. The momentum was ferocious and terrifying. However, his back slightly arched and his forelimbs spread out. His entire body was in the shape of a crocodile, like a tailless giant crocodile. Among the 10 paths and 9 martial arts of cultivators, almost every one of them was a master of martial arts. Although the master of the Jinshan sect who stole the Diyuan Jindan was not very honorable, this move of the Bai form was the essence of Xingyi Quan. Xingyi Xing? He was a Yangtze crocodile. His back was the hardest part of his whole body. It couldn't be cut by a knife or burned by fire. Li Yundong was shocked when he saw this. He knew that this person seemed to be defenseless, but all his gang qi was densely packed on his back. On the one hand, he could detect the strength of the opponent. On the other hand, when Li Yundong's palm hit his back, He would immediately escape and even fight back in an instant. Li Yundong's mind raced like lightning. He sneered and thought to himself, "I'd like to see how well you've mastered this pie form." After saying that, not only did he not stop, but he also slapped the other person's back with even more force. Li Yundong's palm was as fast as lightning and as fierce as thunder. With a muffled bang, it hit the man's back. The man's whole body shook and a cracking sound came from the bones on his back. Obviously, his bones couldn't withstand Li Yundong's terrifying bombardment. For a moment, his muscles and bones desperately tried to transmit the power to his limbs to protect him, so as to avoid his spine being crushed by Li's palm. After being hit by Li Yundong's palm, the man suddenly fell into a thick pile of medicinal dregs of the medicinal pool. He was just about to continue drilling into the ground to escape, but Li Yundong's palm just now had almost shattered all the bones in his body. For a moment, his body was so numb that he couldn't move. In the blink of an eye, Li Yundong was in front of him again. He slammed his knee into his body and hit the Lingtai acupoint on his back. The man felt his back sink and his heart turn cold. He knew that things were not looking good for him. He was definitely not going to make it. Of Li of the shin of Qi to his hand, was of Li's hand, of Li. B. Of Li, B. To Li. Li Yundong was furious. After taking the Rinyuan Jindan, Li Yundong had been in a coma for a long time. If he took the Diyuan Jindan, he would definitely meditate for a longer time. Swallowing the Diyuan Jindan at this time was no different from committing suicide. But this man would rather commit suicide than fall into the hands of outsiders. It was simply harming others without benefiting himself. Li Yundong was furious. He immediately reached out and pinched the man's cheeks. With a crack, he dislocated the man's jaw. Then he grabbed the man's arm that was holding the pill and twisted it back. The man knew that his arm would definitely be broken by Li Yundong, so he simply let Li Yundong grab him. When he bent his arm back, he struggled with his 5 fingers and flicked the 3 Diyuan Jindan in his hand above the medicinal pool. Suddenly, the Diyuan Jindan saw the light of day again, and the alchemy room was once again filled with colorful light. Li Yundong looked up and saw another person quickly getting into the alchemy room. He stared at the Diyuan Jindan greedily and pounced on it. Li Yundong snorted and thrust his hand down. His fingers poked into the man's spine. At the same time, lightning flashed around him, and the Lioha flew out in an instant, stabbing toward the man who was trying to snatch the treasure. The man who broke into the alchemy room saw that there was no one in the room, but the Diyuan Jindan was close at hand. He was ecstatic, but how could he have expected that there was a terrifying enemy hiding in the medicinal pool? As soon as the Lioha flashed, he felt a chill in his waist, followed by a sharp pain. With a scream, his fingers were less than an inch away from the Diyuan Jindan, and his body fell down involuntarily. However, this man was only physically injured. Soon his yang spirit came out of his body. His hand suddenly grew an inch and he grabbed the Diyuan Jindan in his hand. The man snatched the Diyuan Jindan. In his ecstasy, his yang spirit quickly escaped from the skylight. However, his yang spirit was not very strong, so it could not hide the dazzling light of the Diyuan Jindan. For a moment, the colorful light came out of his palm, attracting everyone's attention. The Diyuan Jindan. It's with him. Some cultivators suddenly exclaimed. Before the man could rejoice for long, he saw the other cultivators throwing their magical weapons at him. After Li Yundong chased them into the alchemy room, Ziyuan and Zhou Qin immediately left the top of the alchemy room. This was because as soon as Li Yundong moved, the motionless fundamental seal around them would immediately disappear. If they were still standing there, they would become the target of public criticism and immediately become hedgehogs. It was a pity that the cultivator who had just snatched the Diyuan Jindan was targeted by countless powerful magical weapons and spells as soon as he left the alchemy room. However, he was not a top master with strong cultivation like Li Yundong. He only had time to dodge twice before he was shattered by the countless powerful magical weapons and spells. Zhou Qin and Ziyuan saw that although the man had been shattered, the Diyuan Jindan was still floating in the air intact. It was even blown up by the strong wind and kept floating upward. For a moment, all the cultivators around stared at the Diyuan Jindan, which was emitting colorful light, with crazy greed in their eyes. All of a sudden, the surroundings fell into a terrible silence. It was like the brief moment of calm before the storm, the moment of serenity before the flash flood, the moment of silence before the eruption of a volcano. Everyone was frozen like a stone sculpture. Only the 3 Diyuan Jindan kept rolling in the air. The colorful light dazzled almost everyone's eyes, and their hearts were in a mess. All of a sudden, almost everyone pounced on the Duan Dan. For a moment, there was chaos on Chengdu Peak, and powerful magical weapons were flying everywhere. Just as Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan were about to grab it, they saw that the brilliance of the Duan Dan was covered by the dark crowd. Only a trace of colorful light shone through the gaps of the crowd in the sky. They were stunned to see these cultivators fighting for the Duan Dan. The first one who grabbed the Duan Dan was immediately killed mercilessly by the person who came after him. The second one who grabbed the Duan Dan was much smarter. He grabbed it and stuffed it into his mouth. However, as soon as he stuffed it into his mouth and was about to swallow it, a sharp blade suddenly pierced through his chest. From the bottom to the top, his entire upper body was cut in two, and his head was cut in half. The Duan Dan that had just been stuffed into his mouth once again jumped out of the top of his head, stained with blood and emitting a ferocious colorful light. Zhou Qin was stunned. She was so frightened by the terrible killing scene in front of her that she couldn't help shivering. Although she thought that she was sometimes ruthless enough, even cruel and ruthless, compared with the terrible killing in front of her, who didn't recognize their relatives and didn't distinguish good from bad, who only wanted to grab the Duan Dan, this was the first time she felt the cruelty and indifference of the cultivation world. No one knew what kind of friendship these masked cultivators had with each other, and what kind of relationship they had with each other. But at this time no one cared so much. Because of the sudden incident, many people had no time to prepare when they received the news. They even contacted their friends. They were afraid that they wouldn't be able to catch up with the birth of the Duan Dan, so they immediately rushed here. However, what most people didn't expect was that Chengdu Peak, where the Duan Dan was born, would become their grave. "Oh my God," Zhou Qin said in a trembling voice, "are they all crazy?" Zi Yuan also looked at the scene in front of her in shock. Suddenly, she said in a cold voice, "I finally know what Wang Jinyun is up to." Zhou Qin's eyes widened. She turned her head and asked, "What?" A rare look of intense anger appeared on Zi Yuan's face. She gritted her teeth and spat out word by word, "2 peaches kill 3 soldiers. 3 elixirs kill all greed." Zhou Qin trembled all over. She was not a fool and soon understood the key point. She cried out in shock, "Could it be that Wang Jinyun wants these sects to fight with each other and form a blood feud so that he can profit from it?" Zi Yuan said angrily, "It's not easy for the cultivation world to have a little sign of revival. Some people even ignore the overall situation for their own selfish interests. After this battle, our Chinese cultivation world is very likely to go back 10 years. No." As soon as Zi Yuan's voice fell, a figure flashed beside them. It was Li Yundong who had come out of the alchemy room. His eyes flickered as he looked at the many cultivators who were fighting. "What's wrong?" Zi Yuan asked with a frown. Li Yundong shook his head slightly and said, "Although Wang Jinyun put me in a dangerous situation, I don't think he is the one who spread the news of the appearance of the Duan Dan. It should be someone else." Zi Yuan was stunned. She suddenly seemed to think of something, and her eyes quickly searched for someone among the crowd. When she fixed her eyes on Zheng Yuan, her heart suddenly trembled and her face turned pale. She said in a trembling voice, "I know. It was Zheng Yuan. No, I accidentally let him guess the news. Damn it, it was me who provoked him." Zhou Qin also quickly figured out the key point. She also said with a pale face, "No, it's my fault. If I hadn't come then." Li Yundong's face was as dark as water. He immediately shouted, "Stop talking, now is not the time to talk about this. People are not sages. How can they not make mistakes?" Zheng Yuan actually used a vicious plan to kill 3 soldiers with 2 peaches. It's really hateful. However, the current plan is to quickly calm this turmoil. Zi Yuan calmed down and asked, "What can you do?" Just as Li Yundong was about to speak, he suddenly heard a familiar voice in the air. The voice shouted in surprise, "Yundong, I got it. I got it." Li Yundong was shocked. He looked up and saw that Su Chan had suddenly appeared in the crowd. Relying on her agility, she had actually grabbed 3 Duan Jindans. The moment she grabbed them, the cultivators around her suddenly pounced on her like crazy, like countless crazy beasts. In the next second they were going to tear her to pieces. At this time, Chris, who had been chasing after the colorful light, finally set foot on Chengdu Peak. == Make up for yesterday's update. Another update. The word Tuong. Chapter 576. Li Yundong saw at a glance that Su Chan had snatched the Diyuan Jindan from the crowd, but he was not happy at all. Instead, he only felt frightened. He couldn't imagine what he would do if something happened to Su Chan. In panic, Li Yundong hurriedly shouted, "Idiot, throw it away." Su Chan was stunned, but she quickly came to her senses. When the little girl saw the overwhelming powerful magical weapons smashing toward her, she was so scared that she trembled all over. As she ran, she shouted, "Wow, don't hit me, I don't want it." As she spoke, she casually threw the Diyuan Jindan away, and the 3 elixirs immediately flew out of her hand. Go to the net. 7 KOM. The 3 Diyuan Jindans turned in the air and fell into the hands of a cultivator like silk balls. Before the cultivator had time to be happy, the powerful magical weapons whistling toward him tore him apart in an instant. The man's yang spirit came out of his body and cursed in the air, but no one had time to pay attention to him. They all stared at the 3 Diyuan Jindans floating in the air with red eyes. At this time no one was a fool. They quickly came to their senses. They knew that if anyone went to take the Diyuan Jindan at this time, they would be the target of public criticism and would definitely be beaten up. However, they didn't have Li Yundong's ability to stand motionless under siege, so they didn't dare to come out for a while. Chindu Peak became deserted again. There was only blood left on the ground, and the air was filled with the pungent smell of blood. At this time, Su Chan's face was full of fear. She returned to Li Yundong's side, patted her chest and said in shock, "Fortunately, I threw it quickly. I was scared to death." Li Yundong glared at her fiercely. "What were you thinking just now? Are you crazy?" Su Chan was so scared by Li Yundong's roar that she stammered, I just wanted to help you." Li Yundong said angrily, "Help? Didn't you see what happened to the people who snatched the Diyuan Jindan just now? What would I do if something happened to you?" Although Su Chan had been yelled at by Li Yundong in front of everyone, she was quite happy in her heart. She pretended to be pitiful, pulled Li Yundong's sleeve and whispered, "Well, I'll know in the future. Don't yell at me fiercely in front of so many people. I'm fine, aren't I? I promise I won't do it again next time." Li Yundong couldn't stand such soft words. Even if there was anger in his heart, it dissipated a lot at this time. He snorted and pretended to be angry. "Will there be a next time?" Ziyuan, who was standing to one side, saw that Li Yundong was all talk and no rain. It was obvious that he was no longer angry. She quickly tried to smooth things over and said, "Su Chan, how did you get the Diyuan Jindan just now?" Su Chan's face lit up and she said with a smile, "Isn't that easy? Do you remember how I got the Rinyuan Jindan last time?" Li Yundong saw that Su Chan had just felt guilty and ashamed for a short while, and then she immediately wagged her head and wagged her tail, showing off proudly. He glared at her with both anger and amusement. "Did you get it? Why do I remember that it was your master who got it?" Su Chan pouted and said, "You're so annoying. What's the difference?" Li Yundong couldn't help it anymore. He scolded her with a smile, "You're so shameless." Seeing that Li Yundong finally smiled, Su Chan immediately took his arm with a smile and said in a sweet voice, "Yundong, are you not angry with me anymore?" Li Yundong immediately glared at her again. "How can I not be angry? Why are you here? Tell me the truth." Su Chan's face suddenly fell and she muttered, "You didn't even pursue the matter with Sister Ziyuan and Sister Zhou Qin. Why did you pursue the matter with me?" Zhou Qin saw that the two of them were flirting as if there was no one else around. She coughed awkwardly and whispered, "Master, what should we do now?" Li Yundong glared at Su Chan and whispered, "I'll settle the score with you when we get back." As he said this, he glanced at Chris, who was standing in the distance, and frowned. "Why is she here? Who else is here? Where's John? He must have come with us, right?" Zhou Qin's expression darkened. She told him what had happened on the ropeway and then said in a low voice, "I'm sorry, Master. This is all my fault." After hearing this, Li Yundong was silent for a long time. He took a deep breath and said slowly, "This is his fate. There's nothing we can do about it. We'll talk about these things later. We'll think about a proper solution later." Su Chan glanced at Chris and said with guilt and sympathy, "Yundong, why don't we let her come over? It'll be safer." "No." Li Yundong immediately shook his head and said, "If she comes over, it will be a disaster for her. It's very likely that she will be killed. At least the 3 of you have the ability to protect yourselves. She's just a weak girl. What do you want her to do? She's not a cultivator. I think these cultivators will have some scruples if they want to do anything to her. Don't look at her and pretend that you don't know her, lest some people have ulterior motives and want to use her to do something despicable." Only then did Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin turn their heads. They quickly looked around again, only to see that the night had returned to calm. There were only 3 Diyuan Jindans floating in the air, and there was no one within 10 meters of them. Ziyuan looked at the colorful light soaring into the sky and frowned secretly. This colorful light will attract the attention of the world sooner or later. Li Yundong, why didn't you want to wrap up the Diyuan Jindans just now? Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, would I have had enough time? As soon as the Diyuan Jindans were refined, someone snatched them. As soon as I rushed out, someone greeted me with a powerful magical weapon. As soon as I hid, I heard your shouts. How could I have had time to care about the Diyuan Jindans? Until now, I haven't had time to touch this Diyuan Jindan. Zhou Qin said with lingering fear. Fortunately, there were no Jinshin masters this time. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Su Chan also said strangely, yes, why are there so many cultivators here but there are no Jinshin masters? Li Yundong was also stunned. He couldn't help but say in a low voice, indeed it's very abnormal, even a little strange. He turned his head and looked at Ziyuan. What do you think? Ziyuan pondered for a while and said, if the news was spread by Zheng Yuan, given his nature, he would definitely not inform cultivators with higher cultivation than him. Otherwise he would be caught in a trap of his own making. However, it was also impossible to transmit the news within these few hours without the slightest leak. However, although the Jinshin masters of the major sects are powerful, they are restraining each other, forming a delicate balance. It's also possible that they are around now, but have been hiding and haven't made a move. Besides, although the Diyuan Jindans are important to Yang spirit masters like us, they are not so important to Jinshin masters. Maybe, they disdain to make a move? Speaking of this, Ziyuan also felt that her speculation was very unreasonable. She shook her head and said with a smile, I don't know, but at this time the good news is that there are no Jinshin masters. Otherwise. As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a harsh and arrogant voice. Ah, Shirdi, it's really the birth of the Diyuan Jindans. Your eyes can be saved. Ah, God has eyes. Today, I pinched my fingers and saw the colorful light flashing in the sky. There must be a strange phenomenon. I rushed over to take a look and I was right. Ha ha ha. As soon as Li Yundong heard this voice, his face suddenly changed and he looked in the direction of the voice. 2 Taoists quickly appeared around the Diyuan Jindan. Both of their robes looked very sloppy and tattered. One of them, a tall and thin Taoist, covered his eyes with a black cloth. Obviously he was blind. The other Taoist was short and fat, with a surly and arrogant face. Who else could it be but Su Kong and Su Ling, who had fought with Li Yundong on the Kari Holy Mountain? Li Yundong was shocked. Su Chan, who was beside him, asked curiously, who are these 2 slovenly ghosts? Zhou Qin frowned and looked at the 2 of them, then asked, where did these 2 dirty ghosts come from? Li Yundong looked at Su Ling with a vigilant face and said slowly, what do you think if there is really a Jinshin master coming to steal the Diyuan Jindans, and this Jinshin master has a grudge against you? Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin were stunned at the same time. They quickly reacted and their expressions changed. They said in unison, the Lingkong and Lingkong Taoists of Zenkingism? As soon as they finished shouting, Su Ling immediately looked in the direction of their voices and shouted, strange, there are girls here who know me? When Su Ling saw Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin, his eyes suddenly lit up. He pulled his beard with one hand and said in surprise, how could there be such beautiful women in this world? And there are 3 of them at the same time? And one of them is a fox spirit. But his eyes soon fell on Li Yundong, who was next to him. Su Ling suddenly became angry and became bold. He laughed angrily and said, it's a small world. Shirdi, guess who I saw again? Su Kong put his head close to his ear and whispered a few words. Su Ling snorted a few times, stared at Li Yundong with hatred and said, why do you care about them? The Diyuan Jindans can't run away. Could it be that someone will snatch them away in front of me? Humph, whoever dares to snatch what I like, I'll kill him. His words were extremely arrogant and immediately aroused public anger. A cultivator said angrily, hey, who are you? You're really a yawning toad. How arrogant you are. Which sect are you from? Hurry up and tell me your name. Su Ling didn't even look at him. He flicked his finger at the man who had spoken. With a whoosh, a gust of wind shot out like a bullet and hit the man. The man fell back with a cry, rolled a few times and then stopped moving. Su Ling grinned hideously and said, what's my name? Did you say please? As soon as an expert made a move, it was obvious whether he was an expert or not. As soon as he made a move, the cultivators hiding in the shadows were all shocked. Some cultivators shouted, "Everyone, let's go together and kill this guy." As they spoke, everyone shared a common hatred for the enemy. Once again, the powerful magical weapons and magic arts rushed towards Su Ling like stormy waves. Su Ling did not dodge, nor did he use any magic. He stood with his hands on his hips, facing these magic arts and magical weapons without moving, letting them hit him. Everyone saw that every time Su Ling was hit by a powerful magical weapon, a faint golden ripple appeared on his body, as if ripples were spreading out layer by layer. However, he was unscathed, as if he was wearing an invisible armor. At this time, some experienced and knowledgeable cultivators finally understood. They cried out in horror, "Invincible Jinshin, a Jinshin master!" Ding Nan, who had been staring at the scene, also looked at Su Ling in fear. Even if she didn't know how terrifying a Jinshin master was, she had seen so many powerful magical weapons and magic arts coming at him just now, but he had not dodged or been hurt. What did this mean? Ding Nan said in a trembling voice, "Master, what should we do?" Zheng Yuan looked at Su Ling with a livid face. He had calculated everything, but he hadn't expected that this Jinshin master would appear out of nowhere and ruin his good plan. Zheng Yuan's face was gloomy, and he looked at the scene with cold eyes. Like everyone else present, he quickly thought of something. What should we do if a Jinshin master comes to snatch the Diuan Jindan? Today was the first night watch, and there was one more night watch in the evening. Chapter 577. The sudden appearance of Su Ling was like a ferocious monster appearing in the jungle. The cultivators of all sects were so afraid of the Jinshin masters that they almost lost the will to fight in an instant. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. Even 10 young spirits can't beat a Jinshin. This was almost an irrefutable truth in the cultivation world. No matter which sect it was, every senior cultivator would teach this truth to the young cultivators by word and example. The strength of Su Ling made everyone despair, but there were still a few people on the field who were unwilling to give up and quickly thought of countermeasures. Li Yundong stared at Su Ling without saying a word, quickly thinking of a way to deal with it. Although Zhou Qi knew that a Jinshin master was powerful, she was tough and aggressive, like a newborn calf that was not afraid of a tiger. She whispered to Li Yundong, "Master, what should we do? Is there any way to knock him down?" Li Yundong was silent. Zi Yuan said in a low voice, "Jinshin masters can make their invincible Jinshin immune to almost all magic and most magical items. Except for powerful magic circles and a few magical items that can hurt their young spirits, there is almost no way to break their invincible Jinshin. The Bahuang and Liuha sword can break his Jinshin, but I believe that he won't be stupid enough to use his Jinshin to block the Bahuang and Liuha sword." Su Chan also said with a sad face, "If I had known this would happen, I would have asked Master for the Bahuang sword." Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "The Bahuang sword and the Liuha sword were originally mother and son swords. Now that they have been separated, it will not be easy to merge them again. It's useless for you to come." Su Chan was even more disappointed. "What should we do? Yindong, think of a way. You won't just watch this guy take away all 3 Diuan Jindan, will you?" At this time, Li Yundong said slowly, "When I was in Kari Holy Mountain, I used the Amateus Buddha seal to hurt this guy, but he quickly recovered. I believe that it can only damage his ability to move for a while, but it can't hurt his foundation." Zhou Qin and Su Chan didn't think much of it, but Zi Yuan was shocked. She said in surprise, "You can actually hurt a Jinshin master? This is too exaggerated, isn't it? This is the first time I've heard of a young spirit expert injuring a Jinshin expert." Li Yundong shook his head and said, "It's nothing. I used the Buddhist language Mahamudra. The time it takes to recite the mantra is long enough for you to circle the world 80 times. With such a long chant, I could only injure him lightly. What's there to brag about?" Zhou Qin gritted her teeth and said, "Master, why don't we help you stall him first? You can use the Amateus Buddha seal." Li Yundong's expression turned cold and he said resolutely, "No." Last time, in order to hold him back, 3 guardian deities died tragically in his hands, and Dorji Tenzin almost lost his life. Moreover, if Meiduo hadn't turned into Tsing Lam, I wouldn't have had time to make this Mahamudra. If you want to hold him back, you'll be courting death. I can't let you take this risk." Zhou Qin said anxiously, But master, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Someone has to take the risk. Li Yundong glared at her and said angrily, if I say no then no. Even if we have to enter the tiger's den, it can't be you. Su Chan couldn't get a word in. She looked around and suddenly said in a low voice, Yundong, if we really can't do it, we won't snatch this Diunjin Dan. Anyway, the Medicine King tripod should still be there. How about we snatch it? As long as there's life, there's still hope. Li Yundong suddenly looked at the alchemy room quickly. His heart skipped a beat and he shouted in a low voice, overjoyed, I have an idea. Su Chan, Ziyuan and Zhou Qin were immediately overjoyed and asked in unison, what is it? Li Yundong chuckled. He quickly glanced at the cultivators hiding in the shadows around him and said with a sneer, Wang Jinyuan knows how to divert the trouble. Can't I drive the tiger to swallow the wolf? As he spoke, he suddenly said to Su Chan in a slightly louder voice, Chaner, take the Medicine King tripod and leave first. Don't worry about us. Li Yundong's voice was very subtle. It seemed like he was whispering, but it was just loud enough for Su Ling to hear. Su Ling was stunned and looked around in surprise and ecstasy. He said repeatedly, yes, since the Diunjin Dan was born here, there must be a Medicine King tripod. Ah, where is the Medicine King tripod? I want it too. This time everyone was furious. It was fine that this guy had snatched the Diunjin Dan, but he even wanted to take away the hen that laid the eggs? It was really intolerable. Su Chan didn't understand Li Yundong's sudden words at first, but she soon understood. She nodded cleverly and flew toward the alchemy room without saying a word. Su Ling immediately stopped in front of Su Chan and laughed wildly. So it's here. Little fox, stand aside obediently. If you are obedient, I will let you go if I am in a good mood. Otherwise, I will kill you without saying a word. Su Chan only felt that when he stood in front of her, although he was only short and fat, she felt as if there was a terrifying monster standing in front of her that had not yet shown its fangs. Her heart was beating wildly. She didn't dare to stay. She turned her head and flew back to Li Yundong's side, saying with a face full of righteous indignation, You are so unreasonable. Do you want all the benefits? Su Ling laughed and said, You just realized? This is the advantage of having a big fist. Big fists are the hard truth, ha. As he said this, he turned his head carelessly as if he was looking down on everyone. With his back to them, he revealed a huge flaw. He pressed his hands against the wall of the alchemy room, and Jinshi all over his body rushed out. For a moment, Su Ling's bones crackled like firecrackers. Then the huge stones of the alchemy room began to tremble, and cracks appeared one after another. Seeing this, Ziyuan suddenly took a deep breath and said in a low voice, Master once said that Jinshin masters are top cultivators who can break the rules. At that time I couldn't understand it. Now it seems that I know what it means. This Su Ling can actually use his own Jinshi to shake the formation inside through the hard rocks, thus breaking the magic formation here. This kind of method is really amazing. Zhou Qin complained, Do you still have the mood to praise the enemy at this time? She looked at Li Yundong anxiously and said, Master, it's time to make a move, isn't it? Li Yundong nodded, then immediately shook his head. He said in a deep voice, Don't worry. The cultivators of all sects were now all angry, but they didn't dare to say anything. They were so excited that they were like a pile of dry firewood, just short of a raging fire to immediately set the prairie ablaze. When I start a fire, you will follow me in a while. However, you are only allowed to use powerful magical weapons. You are not allowed to approach him. If you find him facing you, run away immediately. Do you hear me? Both Zhou Qin and Ziyuan nodded. Su Chan asked suspiciously, What about me? Li Yundong shook his head and said, You don't have a powerful magical weapon, so you can't go forward. Help take care of Chris in the distance. Su Chan immediately pouted her lips, looking unhappy. While they were talking, Su Ling had forcibly opened a gap about the width of a person in the alchemy room. At a glance, he saw the Medicine King tripod in the alchemy room and immediately laughed. With a wave of his hand, he took the Medicine King tripod into his hand. With another wave of his other hand, he took 3 Diunjin Dan into his palm. Li Yundong immediately shouted in a low voice, Do it? In an instant, Ziyuan and Zhou Qin immediately released their powerful magical weapons. The Liuha, the Vulcan's whip, and the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk flew out at the same time, aggressively attacking Su Ling. The Liuha that Li Yundong had released was not very powerful in a one-on-one fight, but it was so fast that it was impossible to guard against it. Zhou Qin's Vulcan's whip was not a top magical weapon, so it could not cause any harm to Su Ling. However, Zhou Qin had ulterior motives and whipped Su Ling in the face. Even though Su Ling had a jinshin to protect his body, if he was whipped in the face, even if it didn't hurt or itch, he would still be very angry. When people were angry, their emotions would be unstable and flaws would appear. Among the 3 magic treasures, Ziyuan's 9th Heaven Ziyuan Silk was the strongest in terms of individual combat effectiveness. When this powerful magical weapon attacked, its whole body suddenly twisted into a ball, like a purple diamond drill, constantly rotating and stabbing towards Su Ling. It was so fast that there were obvious ripples in the surrounding air. Its momentum was so fierce that even a jinshin master like Su Ling couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart and frown fiercely. Su Ling even felt that if this 9th Heaven Ziyuan Silk got into his body and he let it go, he was afraid that it would drill a hole in him sooner or later. Although a jinshin master was tyrannical, it did not mean that he was absolutely invincible and invulnerable. As the saying goes, rope saws wood, and dripping water wears through a stone. Su Ling frowned. He raised his hand and flicked his finger, sending the Lioha flying with a clang. He raised his hand and threw the Medicine King tripod to his shitty, Su Kong. He used his free hand to firmly grab the Vulcan's whip that Zhou Qin had thrown over. The Vulcan's whip was surrounded by flames, roasting Su Ling's fingers, but he didn't seem to feel it. The tip of the whip turned into a fiery red poisonous snake, frantically and ferociously spitting its tongue at Su Kong, constantly struggling. For a moment, Su Ling could not free his hand to catch Ziyuan's 9th Heaven Ziyuan Silk, but he immediately took a deep breath. Su Ling's breath caused a strong wind to blow on Qindu Peak, as if a whirlpool had appeared with him as the center. The air around him quickly surged toward him and was sucked away by him. At the moment Su Ling took a deep breath, his body swelled like an inflated bullfrog. Then he blew out a breath toward the 9th Heaven Ziyuan Silk. This breath was condensed into a straight line by him and accurately blew toward the drill bit of the 9th Heaven Ziyuan Silk. Suddenly, the purple drill bit, which was spinning rapidly toward him, stopped abruptly in front of him, as if it had been caught by an invisible giant, unable to move even half a step forward. The cultivators present were all knowledgeable people. They all looked at Su Ling in horror, as if they couldn't believe that this person could block such a powerful magical weapon as Ziyuan with a single breath. Instead of being shocked, Li Yunyang was delighted. He immediately made 2 big handprints towards Su Ling and Su Kong at the same time. Su Ling intended to show off his magic cultivation. Caught off guard, he saw a big golden handprint coming toward him. He suddenly felt suffocated, and the aura of resisting the 9th Heaven Ziyuan Silk weakened a little. Immediately, Ziyuan used all her strength to urge the 9th Heaven Ziyuan Silk and fiercely stabbed forward. With a puff, the 9th Heaven Ziyuan Silk was firmly stuck on Su Ling's shoulder. However, Su Ling had a jinshin to protect him. The 9th Heaven Ziyuan Silk just tried its best to drill down on his body, but it couldn't get in. Although Su Kong was blind, his cultivation was still there. Just by listening to the sound, he could tell that a strong qi was rushing toward him. He immediately dodged to the side, but soon Zhou Qin pulled back her Vulcan's whip and whipped it at him. For a moment, Su Kong was in a difficult position. In his anger, he immediately sent his yang spirit out of his body. He simply ignored his physical body and rushed toward Zhou Qin with a roar. But as soon as he moved, Zhou Qin shook her wrist, and the tip of the whip wrapped around one of the Medicine King tripod's feet. Then, with a pull of the whip, the Medicine King tripod was immediately thrown out of his hand and into the air. Seeing this, Li Yunyang immediately laughed and said, "A fat man and a blind man, what's there to be afraid of? Ziyuan Zhou Qin, let's go and get the cauldron and the elixir back." At this time Jing Yuan, who had been watching quietly, suddenly had a bright light in his eyes. He said to Ding Nan in a low voice, "Pinger, let's go." Ding Nan had long wanted to help Li Yunyang, but she was afraid that if she was too enthusiastic, it would arouse Jing Yuan's suspicion. Therefore she retreated in order to advance. She pretended to hesitate and asked, "Master, isn't this the time to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight? Why should we help him?" Jing Yuan sneered proudly and said, "Humph, Li Yunyang is bluffing. He can't beat this guy, so he wants us to help him fight, so he deliberately used this method to provoke us." Ding Nan asked curiously, "Then don't we have to stand by and watch?" Jing Yuan snorted and said, "Are you kidding? Apart from me, Li Yunyang is the only one here who can fight with this Jinshin master. If we don't help him fight, this Jinshin master will really take away the Diuan Jindan. At that time, even if we want to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight, it will be impossible." So, we'd better deal with this damn Jinshin master first. After that, he immediately took a step forward and said loudly to Su Ling, "Jinren, do you dare to tell me your name?" Su Ling was angry that he had been caught off guard by Li Yunyang. Just as he was about to fight back, he suddenly heard Jing Yuan's shout. He shouted impatiently, "My name is Su Ling. What do you want?" Jing Yuan was overjoyed. He quickly took out the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade and shouted at Su Ling, "Su Ling." Su Ling didn't know that Jing Yuan had such a vicious powerful magical weapon. He suddenly felt his whole body stiffen. An extremely cold aura penetrated his Jinshin protection and quickly pierced several important acupoints all over his body. Although it couldn't hurt him at all, it froze his chi and blood and slowed down for a moment. The spiritual power of cultivators all came from the operation of chi and blood, and even Jinshin masters were no exception. At this moment, Su Ling's chi and blood stagnated, and his Jinshin immediately weakened. The ninth heaven Ziyuan silk, which was constantly rotating on his shoulder, suddenly got into his shoulder with a puff. At this moment, everyone's eyes widened. They all realized that this Jinshin master named Su Ling. His Jinshin had been broken. Chapter 578. Su Ling looked at his shoulder in disbelief, as if he couldn't believe that his indestructible body had been broken. His eyes widened, and his gaze changed from surprise to shock, and then from shock to anger. Su Ling subconsciously reached out to grab the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk that had drilled into his shoulder, trying to pull it out of his body. Watch net. 7KOM. But as soon as he grabbed the purple silk magic treasure, it immediately changed from a constantly rotating drill to a rapidly cutting blade. Countless tiny blades appeared on its edge, instantly tearing Su Ling's skin. Su Ling's hand was cut into a bloody mess. He roared, but he still clutched the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk tightly, frantically pulling it out of his body bit by bit. Jing Yuan knew that if he let Su Ling pull the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk out of his body, Su Ling would become leakless and regain his invincible Jinshin. At that time he would be in big trouble. Jing Yuan immediately shouted again, "Su Ling!" Almost at the same time, Li Yunyang struck out with his palm again, and Zhou Qin also whipped Su Ling. Su Kong immediately stood in front of Su Ling. He could block the Mahamudra and the Vulcan's whip, but he couldn't block Jing Yuan's insidious Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade. Su Ling's body stiffened again. Although he had taken precautions this time, he still felt numb all over. The ninth heaven Ziyuan silk, which was about to be pulled out of his shoulder, plunged deeper into his shoulder. Su Ling was furious and his eyes turned blood red. He reacted very quickly and simply did not pull it out. Instead, he slapped the bottom of the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk, causing it to pass through his body. Seeing Su Ling's actions, Ziyuan was shocked. Oh no! This Su Ling is so ruthless. She immediately controlled the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk to turn into countless tiny purple threads, drilling into Su Ling's wound. Although the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk looked like silk, it was actually a magical item transformed from the colorful clouds of the ninth heaven. Could change its shape at will. Once it entered Su Ling's body through the wound, it would immediately take root in his body like an old tree and control his meridians and organs. At that time, no matter how powerful Su Ling was, he would not be able to reverse the situation. However, how could a golden body master be a joke? How could he be easily defeated? After Su Ling forced the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk out of his body, he was furious and quickly pinched his fingers. His whole body suddenly shone with golden light, and his golden body appeared, as if he was wearing a thick layer of golden armor visible to the naked eye. As soon as the nine heavens purple silk hit the golden armor, it was unable to advance any further and was even sent flying several meters away. When Jing Yuan was about to shout again, he saw Su Ling glaring at him with terrifying and ferocious eyes. He roared ferociously, "You're courting death." After that, he raised his hand and slapped Jing Yuan with his palm. Although Su Ling's palm was not as powerful as Li Yunyang's Mahamudra, he was a golden body master after all, and his every move had earth-shattering power. This casual palm suddenly made everyone on Chengdu Peak feel as if the air had been sucked away. Although this palm was not aimed at them, everyone was suffocated by the momentum of this palm. The others were still like this, and Jing Yuan, who was the first to bear the brunt of it, was so shocked that he trembled all over. There was a flash of fear in his eyes, and he quickly took out a talisman that he had prepared with the immortal pen and shouted, "Earth!" With a bang, A hard and solid stone wall rose in front of him in an instant. This stone wall was made of hard rock, up to 1 meter thick. However, Su Ling's palm immediately smashed the stone wall into pieces, but the palm did not stop there. It fiercely slapped toward Jing Yuan. Jing Yuan hadn't expected that the stone wall would not be able to stop the power of this palm at all. He was shocked and had nowhere to hide, so he could only grit his teeth, push out his hands and take the palm head-on. With a loud bang, Jing Yuan was hit by the palm, and his whole body shook violently. He spat out a mouthful of blood and knelt on the ground, unable to move for a while. Ding Nan, who was standing to one side, was shocked. She hurriedly bent down and asked, "Master, what's wrong with you?" At this time, the qi and blood in Jing Yuan's chest were rolling, and the meridians all over his body were in a mess. He stared at Su Ling with hatred, and there was fear in his eyes. He barely opened his mouth and said, "Go, go. If you don't go, you won't be able to." As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately spat out another mouthful of blood. Ding Nan had been cultivating for a long time. She could see at a glance that Jing Yuan had spat out a mouthful of bright red blood. It was obvious that his internal organs had been injured, and it was an extremely serious internal injury. She was shocked and was about to take Jing Yuan to escape when she saw Su Ling smiling ferociously. "You want to leave? You want to leave after hurting me? How can it be so easy?" Just as Su Ling was about to kill them all, the powerful magical weapons of Li Yunyang, Zhou Qin, and Zi Yuan arrived one after another. At this time, the other cultivators also came to their senses, and the powerful magical weapons that blotted out the sky and earth rushed towards Su Ling. Su Ling suddenly became furious. While resisting the powerful magical weapons around him, he roared, "Well, none of you can escape today. Even if I have to go through the thunder retribution today, I will kill all of you. Shirdi, protect me." When Su Ling heard this, he immediately reached into his arms and took out 2 talismans. He quickly pinched his fingers and muttered something. The 2 talismans between his fingers suddenly burned. One of the 2 talismans burned with a yellow flame, while the other burned with a green flame. Soon, the 2 flames burned like a prairie fire in the blink of an eye, quickly turning into 2 statues in the air. As soon as the 2 statues appeared, they immediately formed 2 barriers, firmly enveloping Su Ling and Su Ling. As soon as Zhou Qin saw the 2 statues, she was shocked. "What are these?" Zi Yuan was also shocked. She cried out involuntarily, "They seem to be the 32 celestial emperors of Taoism?" Zhou Qin asked in surprise, "What are the 32 celestial emperors?" Li Yunyang said with a solemn face, "The yellow one is Tai Huang Celestial Emperor Huangzing, one of the 8 celestial emperors of the East. He is known as Yu Jin Yuming. He is in charge of the Book of Longevity and lives in the Ziwei Palace. His name is Yuanyang Yellow, so his whole body is surrounded by yellow flames. The other one is Taming Yuan Celestial Emperor, also known as Sunatian. He is in charge of the Soul Rebirth and lives in the Zifang Palace. His name is Shangyang Green, so his whole body is surrounded by green flames." At this time, Zi Yuan gritted her teeth and said, "Damn it, this guy has the protection of Tai Huang Celestial Emperor Huangzing, so his wound is healing. The other one is Taming Yuan Celestial Emperor, who is used to guard against the Hell Wuzhang Enchanting Jade. If Zheng Yuan calls for souls again, the Taming Yuan Celestial Emperor will instantly rebirth all the ghosts in the Hell Wuzhang Enchanting Jade." Zhou Qin suddenly gasped. She looked at Su Ling in horror. Under the protection of the 2 Taoist gods, the torn wound on his shoulder was rapidly healing. Then he roared, and the golden light all over his body shook violently. In an instant, the Yang spirit came out of his body, rose into the air, and turned into a shining golden, extremely powerful Tieba god. With the protection of the 2 Taoist celestial emperors, Su Ling could use his golden body without fear. After his Yang spirit came out of his body, he looked down at the people on Tiandu Peak. He grinned grimly and roared, "Go to hell! Go to hell!" He suddenly opened his hands and his whole body was like a dazzling golden sun, blooming with more and more dazzling light. Li Yunyang was shocked. He immediately turned his head and said to Zi Yuan, "Go and get Chris here." As soon as Li Yunyang spoke, Zi Yuan instantly flashed to Chris, who was already dumbfounded, and pulled her to her side. At this time, Su Ling had already fallen into a state of rage. His golden body was instantly pulled into countless sharp golden threads, shooting indiscriminately in all directions like thousands of arrows. Some of the cultivators who had been hiding in the darkness were pierced by Su Ling's Yang spirit doppelganger without saying a word. Some of them were so frightened that they turned around and ran, but Su Ling's doppelganger quickly caught up with them and mercilessly killed them. When Zheng Yuan, who had been seriously injured, saw this scene, his eyes flashed with despair. He gritted his teeth, quickly took out 3 golden needles from his arms, and pierced them into the Baihui acupoint on the top of his head. The Baihui acupoint was an important acupoint of the human body, and it could mobilize the potential and yuan-qi of the human body. Zheng Yuan's piercing was tantamount to quenching his thirst with poison. He suddenly felt refreshed, and a stream of blood qi surged all over his body. His face also became ruddy. He took a deep breath, took out 2 talismans and recited the incantation. In an instant the ground under his feet immediately sank. Yi Dingnan and Alba all fell into a pit and hid in the 9 earths. Li Yunyang quickly pinched the immovable fundamental seal with his hands, and with the posture of a Buddha that could not be moved by the wind, he forcibly blocked Su Ling's terrifying large-scale killing move 3 meters in front of him. Su Chan and the others saw that there seemed to be a rain of golden arrows around them. For a moment, screams and wails rang out one after another. Many cultivators immediately died on the spot. The cultivators who had barely managed to resist did not dare to stay any longer. They quickly turned into beams of blue light and fled from the terrifying Tindu Peak like wolves and rats. Zhou Qin looked at the raging Su Ling with fear and said in a trembling voice, "Master, what should we do? What should we do?" Li Yunyang also looked at Su Ling in shock and couldn't help but say, "It turns out that he didn't use his full strength last time?" Su Chan also looked at Su Ling in horror and said in a trembling voice, "Yundong, we don't want this Diyuan Jindan anymore. Let's go. This Jinshin master is too powerful. We can't beat him." However, Li Yundong's face was cold and he said in a deep voice, "It's not that there's no way." Su Chan and Zhou Qin were shocked at the same time. They hadn't expected that Su Ling would be so strong that Li Yundong still had a way to deal with him. They asked in unison, "What way?" At this time, Ziyuan's heart also moved. She looked at Li Yundong with wide eyes and said, "Could it be that you want to?" Li Yundong nodded and pointed to the sky. "Draw heavenly thunder to subdue him." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.